The arrows struck with merciless precision, a sudden storm of death that whistled through the smoke-filled air and buried themselves deep into the back of the man who had once been Shahansh's most feared champion. He staggered forward into the narrow courtyard, 5 shafts protruding from between his shoulder blades, their red fletching glistening with fresh blood. Yet he did not fall. Not yet. His name was Orhan Bey'in. Took another step, boots crunching over broken tile and spent arrow shafts, his twin blades still gripped tightly in bloodless hands. His face, bearded, scarred, eyes burning with unquenchable fury, remained locked forward, jaw clenched so tightly the veins stood out like cords along his neck. Behind him, on the roof of a half-burned wooden storehouse, one of Shahansh's archers slumped lifeless, his own bow slipping from dead fingers. The man had paid for that volley with his life, but the damage was done. Bey'in exhaled a ragged breath, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Around him, the chaos of the inner citadel's final defense raged on, steel clashing in every alley, smoke rolling thick between the ancient stone buildings, the screams of the dying mingling with the distant thunder of Ottoman catapults still pounding the outer walls. The air reeked of pitch, blood, and fear. From the smoke ahead, Orhan Sahib emerged like a figure carved from destiny itself, saber drawn, cloak whipping behind him in the wind generated by the fires. Orhan was at his right hand, eyes widening in horror as he saw the arrows embedded in his brother-in-arms. Bey'in, Orhan's voice cut through the din, deep and commanding yet laced with raw concern. Hold, my friend. Bey'in turned his head slowly, the movement costing him visible effort. His eyes met Orhan's with a fierce, unbroken light. My lord, the champion is dead. I sent him to hell, but the archer on the roof, he was waiting. A wet cough escaped him, spraying red across his beard. The citadel is breaking, I can feel it. The gates, they will open soon. He took one more step, then his knees buckled. Orhan lunged forward and caught him before he could collapse fully, lowering the fierce commander gently against the weathered stone wall of the storehouse. Blood flowed freely now, soaking the back of Bey'in's dark vest, the arrows shifting with every shallow breath. Orhan knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. You have done enough, Orhan Bey'in, more than enough. Rest now. The Almighty sees your sacrifice. A bitter smile twisted Bey'in's lips. Rest, not while Shahansh still draws breath, not while that manipulative dog hides behind his last stones. He gripped Orhan's forearm with surprising strength, his fingers slick with blood. Promise me you will finish it. No mercy for him. Justice, pure and final. For Yakid, for Kuleds, for every brother we lost in the forest and before these cursed walls. I swear it, Orhan replied, voice low and solemn, heavy with the weight of oaths that could not be broken. By the most merciful and the most just, his head will decorate the highest tower before this day ends. Bey'in nodded once, satisfaction flickering across his pain-twisted features. Then his gaze shifted to Orhan. Right hand of our lord, to lead the final charge. Do not let them regroup. Drive them into the open, where the smoke and fire will finish what arrows could not. Orhan's jaw tightened, eyes glistening with unshed tears he refused to let fall. I will, brother, your blades have carved the path, now I will walk it to the end. A sudden roar erupted from deeper within the citadel, Shahansh's remaining guards launching one last desperate counterattack down the narrow street. Horns blared weakly, voices screaming orders laced with panic. Smoke billowed thicker as fresh fires were set by the defenders in a futile attempt to slow the Ottoman advance. Orhan rose to his feet, saber flashing in the dim, smoky light. Orhan, take command of the center. Mahmud, anchor the left flank. Abdul Rahman, swing right and cut off their retreat. Mustafa, Tamir Boga, push forward with the ladders and grapples. We take the inner keep before night falls completely. He looked down one final time at Bey'in, who still breathed, though each breath came shallower. Hold on, old friend, the surgeons will come, the war is not yet finished with you. Bey'in managed a weak, bloodied grin. Go, my lord, fate waits for no man, not even you. With those words hanging in the air like a final oath, Orhan turned and strode into the smoke, Orhan at his side, the rest of the captains rallying around them with raised blades and shouted invocations to the Almighty. The host surged forward once more, boots pounding over blood-slick stone, banners snapping despite the heavy air, the thunder of their advance drowning out the dying cries of the citadel's last defenders. Behind them, Bey'in remained propped against the wall, twin blades resting across his lap, eyes half-closed but still watching the battle rage on. Blood continued to pool beneath him, mixing with the mud and rain, yet his chest still rose and fell with stubborn defiance. The inner citadel was falling, street by street, tower by tower. Shahansh's manipulative reign was crumbling under the combined weight of starvation, betrayal, and the relentless steel of men who had sworn justice above all. But the final confrontation still awaited in the heart of the keep, where the false ruler no doubt prepared one last web of lies, one last desperate escape, or one final act of cruelty. And somewhere in the shadows of the burning citadel, the last hidden traitor, whose name had never been fully revealed, still waited for his moment to strike, perhaps hoping to deliver Shahanshah to safety or plunge a dagger into Orhan's back at the moment of triumph. The war had entered its bloodiest and most decisive hour. Smoke choked the sky. Fire consumed the past. And ahead, in the heart of the storm, Orhan Sahib marched forward with unyielding purpose, the fate of empires hanging upon the edge of his blade and the unbreakable will of those who still stood beside him. Faladios' sacrifice had bought them this moment. The smoke hung so thick in the narrow streets of the inner citadel that it felt like breathing molten iron. Orhan Sahib moved through it like a shadow of judgment itself, saber held low and ready, his cloak torn and streaked with the blood of fallen enemies. Behind him, Turhan and the captains pressed forward in tight formation. Mustafa on the left, Tamir Boga anchoring the right, Abdul Rahman and Mahmud driving the flanks inward like the closing jaws of a steel trap. The sound of their boots on broken stone mixed with the distant crash of collapsing masonry and the ever-present roar of flames devouring what remained of Shahanshah's last stronghold. From a side alley came a fresh wave of desperate defenders, perhaps 30 of the tyrant's most loyal guards, faces gaunt with hunger, eyes wild with the knowledge that this was their final stand. Steel met steel in a savage, chaotic frenzy. Turhan's saber flashed first, cleaving through the shoulder of the lead attacker with a wet crunch. "For Faladio," he roared, voice raw with grief and fury. "For every brother lost," the cry spread like fire through the ranks. Mustafa drove his spear into the gut of another, twisting viciously before wrenching it free. Tamir Boga planted his feet and held a narrow choke point, his shield taking blow after blow while his blade found throats and gaps in armor. Orhan himself fought in the center, his movements economical yet devastating. He parried a wild overhead swing, stepped inside the guard, and drove his curved blade upward beneath the man's ribs. The defender gasped, eyes widening in final realization before collapsing at Orhan's feet. "No more lies," Orhan growled, wrenching the steel free. "No more betrayals, today the scales balance." As the last of the counterattack was cut down, a breathless scout stumbled through the smoke. "My lord, the inner keep's main gate is cracking under the rams, but Shahanshah has barricaded himself in the highest tower. He has archers on the rooftops and a handful of his black-clad elite still guarding the stairs. And there are rumors among the defectors that he plans to burn the keep with everyone inside rather than surrender." Orhan's jaw tightened. He wiped blood from his blade with a scrap of cloth torn from a fallen banner. "Then we move now, no delay. Turhan, take 50 men and clear the rooftops. Eliminate every archer. Mahmud, secure the lower levels and open the gates wide so our full strength can pour in. Abdul Rahman, Mustafa, Tamir Boga, follow me up the tower stairs. We end this today." They split like water around stone. Turhan vanished into the smoke with his detachment, their war cries soon echoing from above as they stormed the rooftops in brutal close-quarters fighting. The sound of bodies falling and arrows clattering on tile drifted down through the haze. Orhan led the ascent into the inner keep, climbing the wide, blood-slick stone stairs 2 at a time. The air grew hotter, thicker with smoke and the stench of fear. At every landing they met resistance, small knots of defenders fighting with the frenzy of cornered animals. Blades rang, men screamed, bodies tumbled back down the steps. At the third landing, a towering black-clad elite guard blocked their path, swinging a massive two-handed axe. Tamir Boga met him first, shield raised, but the impact drove him back a step. Orhan stepped in beside him, feinting low, then striking high. The elite guard parried desperately, but Mustafa came from the side and drove a dagger under his armpit. The giant fell with a gurgling roar, clearing the way. Higher they climbed, the tower narrowing, the stairs becoming steeper and more treacherous. Flames licked at the wooden supports below, sending sparks swirling upward like angry fireflies. The sound of fighting on the rooftops intensified. Turhan's men were winning, but at a cost. Occasional arrows still whistled down from above, forcing the climbers to press against the walls. At the final landing before the summit chamber, they found the last line of defense. 6 of Shahanshah's most trusted captains, faces pale but eyes defiant. Among them stood a man Orhan recognized, the one whose name had haunted the sealed messages. It was Damir Khan's former second, a captain named Jarkata who had once ridden with them in the early days before the forest ambush. His betrayal was now laid bare. "Jarkata," Orhan said, voice low and heavy with sorrow and steel, "you ate at our fires, you swore upon the holy book, and yet you sold us for the tyrant's gold." Jarkata's hand trembled on his sword hilt. "The war was endless, Orhan Sahib. Shahanshah promised an end, land's safety for my family. I was weak." "Weakness invited the serpent," Orhan replied, echoing Faladios's words from earlier battles. and the serpent always devours its host. The duel was swift and merciless. Jarkata lunged with desperate speed, but Orhan parried cleanly, stepped inside, and drove his blade straight through the traitor's chest. Jarkata gasped, eyes wide with final regret, before sliding off the steel and crumpling to the stone. The remaining 5 captains fought bravely, but fell one by one to the combined fury of Orhan, Mustafa, Tamir Boga, and Abdul Rahman. The stairs ran red. At last, only one door remained, the heavy oak portal to the summit chamber, barred from within and reinforced with iron. Flames were already licking at the lower levels of the tower. The entire keep would soon become an inferno if they delayed. Orhan stepped back, then drove his shoulder against the door with all his strength. Wood splintered, again and again. On the 4th impact, the bar gave way with a resounding crack and the door burst inward. The summit chamber was a scene of madness and ruin. Tapestries burned along the walls. Maps and scrolls lay scattered and trampled. In the center, surrounded by overturned tables and the last remnants of his hoarded food, stood Shahanshah. The once manipulative ruler was a broken shadow of his former self, gaunt, eyes sunken and wild, robes stained and torn. In one hand he clutched a jeweled dagger, in the other a torch. Behind him, a small balcony overlooked the burning citadel, the wind whipping smoke and embers into the chamber like the breath of hell itself. Orhan Sahib, Shahanshah rasped, his voice cracking with hatred and fear. You have taken everything, my city, my men, my power, but you will not take me alive to parade as a trophy. He raised the torch toward a pile of oil-soaked rugs and broken furniture. One spark and we all burn together. Justice, honor, your precious authority, it will die here with us in the flames. Orhan stepped forward slowly, saber lowered but ready, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of destiny. You speak of burning as if it is your choice, but fire has already judged you, Shahanshah. It consumed your lies in the forest. It devoured your champions before the walls. It now hungers for the last of your deceit. Drop the torch, face justice with whatever dignity remains, or die a coward's death in the fire you yourself created. For a long moment, the only sounds were the crackle of flames below and the distant shouts of Ottoman warriors securing the lower levels. Shahanshah's hand trembled violently. His eyes darted between Orhan and the balcony, calculating one final escape, one last betrayal. Then, with a scream of pure desperation, he hurled the torch toward the oil-soaked pile. Orhan moved like lightning. He lunged forward, saber flashing, and struck the torch from Shahanshah's hand midair. The burning brand spun away and clattered harmlessly onto the stone floor away from the oil. At the same moment, Mustafa and Tamir Boga rushed in from the sides, seizing the tyrant's arms and forcing him to his knees. Shahanshah struggled wildly, spitting curses and promises of revenge, but his strength was gone. The manipulative ruler who had sown betrayal across the land now knelt defeated, his web of lies finally torn apart. Orhan stood over him, breathing hard, blood and soot streaking his face. The war you began in treachery ends in justice. Your head will be displayed upon the highest tower so that every soul in these lands knows the cost of broken oaths. The people you starved and terrorized will live under rightful authority, and those who followed you in weakness will be judged with mercy if they truly repent. He turned to his captains. Bind him, take him down alive. The surgeons must see to Faladios. The citadel is ours, but the eastern threat still lingers. We have won the heart of the city, yet the greater storm on the horizon has not yet broken. As Shahanshah was dragged away, still screaming curses that grew weaker with every step, Orhan stepped onto the balcony. Below him, the citadel burned in controlled sections, Ottoman banners rising over captured towers, warriors cheering as the last pockets of resistance fell. Smoke rose in great columns toward the gray sky, carrying with it the ashes of a false rain. But in the distance, on the eastern hills, dust clouds grew thicker. The opportunistic host was drawing nearer, emboldened by the chaos or perhaps hopping to strike while the victors were bloodied and weary. Orhan gripped the stone railing, eyes narrowing against the wind and smoke. The serpent's head is taken, he murmured, but its body still thrashes. The war is not over. He turned back into the chamber where flames were being extinguished and orders already flew. Send riders to Faladios, tell him the tyrant lives for now. Tell him justice has been served, then prepare the host. We march east at first light to meet whatever new betrayal fate still holds. The long siege had ended in fire and blood, but the epic continued. Honor had triumphed over deceit. Yet new shadows gathered on the horizon, new tests of loyalty awaited, and the flame of rightful authority, though bright, would need to burn even fiercer to consume the remnants of darkness still stirring beyond the broken walls. The smoke continued to rise, the steel remained sharp, and the march of destiny pressed relentlessly forward into the uncertain dawn. The sun had barely clawed its way above the eastern hills when the first riders returned from the outer lines, their horses lathered and eyes wide with urgency. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest balcony of the captured citadel, the morning wind whipping his cloak as he gazed across the smoking ruins of what had once been Shahanshah's proud stronghold. Below, Ottoman banners fluttered from every tower and gate. The inner keep still smoldered in places, but the fires were under control. Warriors moved through the streets with disciplined purpose, clearing bodies, distributing what little food remained, tending to the wounded who lay groaning in makeshift shelters. Shahanshah himself knelt in chains in the central square, surrounded by grim-faced guards. The once manipulative ruler was a hollow shell now, gaunt, eyes sunken, his fine robes reduced to rags. He no longer screamed curses. He only stared at the ground, muttering broken promises of revenge that no one bothered to hear. But victory tasted of ash. A scout dismounted and climbed the stairs two at a time, dropping to one knee before Orhan. "My lord, the eastern host has not retreated. They number close to 6,000 now. More opportunistic beys have joined them, lured by tales of our exhaustion and the riches they believe still lie within these walls. They march under no single banner, only greed and the hope that we are too bloody to fight again. Their vanguard is less than half a day's ride away." Tarhan stepped forward, his face still streaked with soot and dried blood from the night's fighting. "Then we meet them before they reach the city. We cannot allow them to regroup or link with any remnants still loyal to the fallen tyrant." Orhan nodded slowly, his gaze shifting toward the eastern horizon where dust clouds rose like dark omens. "We have won the citadel, but the war refuses to die quietly. Gather the captains. We ride out at midday. The host will form in battle array beyond the outer walls. Let the people of the city see that their new rulers do not hide behind stone. They meet every threat in the open." Word spread quickly through the ranks. Despite exhaustion, despite wounds still fresh and unbandaged, the men answered the call. Prayers rose in steady waves as they formed columns, invocations to the most merciful, the protector, the just. Surgeons worked frantically on the most gravely wounded, including Burhan Faladios, who had been carried to a shaded corner of the inner courtyard. The fierce commander still breathed, though each rise and fall of his chest was shallow. The arrows had been removed, the wounds packed with herbs and bound tightly, but fever had already begun to burn in his eyes. Orhan knelt beside him before mounting. "You held the line when it mattered most, Faladios. The tyrant is taken. Justice has begun its work. Rest now. The surgeons say you may yet ride again if the Almighty wills it." Faladios managed a weak, blood-flecked smile. "Ride without me, my lord. Finish what we started in the forest that night. Drive the jackals back into the hills. And if I fall here, tell the men their blades were guided by honor." "You will not fall," Orhan replied firmly. "We still need your twin blades at our side when the greater storms come. Hold on, brother." With that, Orhan rose and mounted his stallion. Tarhan rode at his right hand as always, saber cleaned and ready. The host formed outside the shattered gates, thousands of weary but resolute warriors, banners snapping in the wind, the thunder of hooves and marching feet echoing across the plain. Mahmud commanded the left wing despite his bandaged leg. Abdul Rahman led the right. Mustafa and Tamir Boga rode with the vanguard, their eyes hardened by endless battle. Altuddin Saheb and Jarkada's replacement captains held the center with the heavier infantry. They marched east across the blood-soaked plain, leaving the smoking citadel behind them like a chapter finally closed yet still smoldering. The air carried the mingled scents of ash, rain, and distant pine from the hills. As the sun climbed higher, the dust clouds of the enemy grew clearer, 6,000 strong, a loose confederation of opportunistic lords and their retainers, marching not under unified command but driven by greed and the scent of possible plunder. The two forces met upon a wide, open stretch of ground where the plain met the first gentle rises of the eastern hills. The enemy host halted, their lines ragged but numerous, banners of different houses fluttering uncertainly. Their leaders rode forward under flags of parley, faces arrogant, eyes calculating. Orhan rode out to meet them with only Tarhan and two captains at his side. The lead bey, a thick-set man with a forked beard and ornate armor, spoke first, his voice loud and mocking. "Orhan Sahib, you have taken the city, but at what cost? Your men are weary, your numbers thinned by the long siege. Join with us, share the spoils, there is enough wealth here for all. Why spill more blood when we can rule these lands together?" Orhan's gaze was cold and steady. "You speak of spoils as if honor can be weighed in gold. You come like jackals to feast on the carcass of a fallen tyrant, yet you offer alliance to the very man who ended his reign. I offer you one chance only, turn back now, return to your hills and live. Continue this march and you will find only steel and justice waiting." The Bey laughed a harsh, ugly sound. Justice, from a man whose own ranks still whisper of hidden traitors. You are exhausted, Orhan. Your famous right hand Tarhan cannot fight every battle, and your fierce dog Faladios lies dying in the citadel. We will take what we want. He turned his horse and rode back to his lines. Horns blared across the enemy host. They began to advance, slow at first, then faster, a disordered but massive wave of cavalry and infantry pouring down the gentle slopes. Orhan raised his saber high. Sons of the faithful, they come for plunder and lies. We stand for justice and rightful authority. Form the lines, archers forward, for the Almighty and for the fallen. The Ottoman host responded with a thunderous roar. Archers under Zarkin and Killil unleashed the first volleys, darkening the sky with whistling shafts. The enemy charge faltered as hundreds fell, but momentum carried the rest forward. Then the two armies crashed together in a maelstrom of steel and chaos. Close quarters fighting erupted across the plain, swords hacking, spears thrusting, horses screaming as they collided. Tarhan led the first countercharge, his saber a blur of death as he carved through the enemy vanguard. For Faladios, for every brother lost, the cry became a battle hymn. Orhan fought in the center, his stallion wheeling as he struck down rider after rider. Smoke from burning grass and scattered fires began to rise once more, turning the battlefield into a familiar hell of fire and shadow. The psychological weight pressed upon the enemy. Many of them had expected an easy victory against a tired foe, but they found instead men forged in the long siege, men who fought with the fire of those who had already paid too high a price to yield now. Yet the numbers told, the opportunistic host was vast. Fresh waves kept coming, pressing the Ottoman lines hard. On the left, Mahmud's flank buckled momentarily under a heavy cavalry charge. On the right, Abdul Rahman fought desperately to hold. Then from the citadel behind them, a new sound rose, horns, but not of the enemy. A small but determined column emerged from the gates, riding hard to join the fray. At its head, propped in the saddle and pale as death, rode Burhan Faladios. Bandages stained red, twin blades strapped across his back. He had refused to stay behind. The surgeons had protested, but the fierce commander had declared that if he was to die, it would be in the saddle beside his brothers. His arrival sent a surge of renewed strength through the Ottoman ranks. Faladios' lives, the cry went up, the blade of justice still rides. Faladios drove straight into the thickest fighting, his blades flashing despite the pain that twisted his face with every movement. He dueled an enemy Bey personally, twin blades weaving past a heavy mace to strike true. The man fell, and the surrounding enemy wavered. Orhan saw the moment and seized it. Now, encircle them, drive the flanks inward, cut their retreat, and let the smoke choke their greed. The battle raged for hours under the climbing sun. Fire and smoke became turning points again and again, grass fires spreading, forcing men to fight amid blinding haze, horses rearing in panic. Betrayal flickered even here. A small group of the enemy tried to slip toward the citadel to free Shahanshah, only to be cut down by Mustafa and Tamir Boga. By late afternoon, the opportunistic host began to break. Their leaders, seeing the cost too high and the plunder too uncertain, sounded the retreat. Thousands lay dead or wounded upon the plain. The survivors fled back into the hills, pursued by Tarhan's riders until the light began to fade. As the sun dipped low, painting the battlefield in hues of blood and gold, Orhan Sahib rode among his exhausted but victorious men. Faladios still sat his horse, barely conscious but alive, supported by two warriors. The wounded were being gathered, the dead honored with quiet prayers. Yet even in victory, new shadows stirred. Scouts reported that farther east, beyond the hills, yet another force was gathering, larger, better organized, perhaps the remnants of Shahanshah's distant allies who had finally decided to act. And within the citadel, whispers had begun again. Some captains, weary beyond measure, spoke quietly of negotiating peace rather than continuing the endless war. Orhan dismounted near a small rise, looking out over the fallen and the distant hills. He placed a hand upon his blade and spoke softly, as if to the wind itself. The serpent's head is taken, its body lies broken upon this plain, but new heads grow in the darkness beyond. The war is not over, it has only changed its face. He turned to his captains, voice rising with quiet, unyielding power. Rest tonight, tend the wounded, honor the fallen. Tomorrow we march east once more. We will root out every last remnant of betrayal. We will build authority upon the ashes, not with mercy alone, but with justice tempered by wisdom. The Almighty has brought us this far through forest, flame, and blood. He will not abandon us now. The host began to make camp upon the hard-won field, fires lit against the coming night, prayers rising in rhythmic waves toward the darkening sky. Smoke still drifted across the plain, carrying the scent of victory and the heavy promise of trials yet to come. Orhan Bey'in was carried back to the citadel under careful guard, his sacrifice and defiance a living banner for every man who had fought that day. And in the distance, the hills watched silently, hiding whatever new storm fate still prepared for the righteous and the weary alike. The long epic continued through fire, through smoke, through steel and unbreaking faith toward a destiny that only the Almighty could fully see. The march of justice pressed onward, relentless and unyielding, into the uncertain night. The fires of the battlefield still smoldered as night descended like a heavy cloak over the blood-soaked plain. Orhan Sahib walked slowly among the fallen, his boots leaving dark prints in the trampled grass and mud. Torches flickered in the hands of his captains, casting long, wavering shadows across the faces of the dead and the weary living. The air was thick with the copper tang of blood, the acrid bite of smoke, and the distant groan of wounded men being carried back toward the citadel. Prayers rose in low, rhythmic murmurs, invocations to the most merciful, the healer of the broken, the turner of fates, as surgeons and companions tended to the injured under makeshift awnings. Orhan Bey'in had been returned to the inner keep under heavy guard. The fierce commander lay upon a pallet of clean straw in a chamber that still smelled of smoke and old tapestries. His wounds had been cleaned and rebound, but fever burned hot in his veins. His twin blades rested beside him like faithful hounds, and though his eyes were half closed, they still held that unquenchable fire. When Orhan entered, Bey'in stirred, voice a ragged whisper. "Did we break them, my lord?" Orhan knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on the man's shoulder. "We broke them, Burhan. The jackals fled back into the hills with their tails between their legs. Your arrival turned the tide when it mattered most. The men fought like lions because they saw you still riding. Rest now. The surgeons say the fever may break by morning if the Almighty wills it." A faint, blood-flecked smile touched Beyin's lips. "Then tell them the blade is not yet sheathed. I will ride again when the next storm comes." His eyes drifted shut, breath steadying into the shallow rhythm of exhausted sleep. Orhan rose and stepped onto the balcony once more. Below in the central square, Shahanshah remained in chains, guarded by Mustafa and Tamir Boga. The fallen ruler sat slumped against a stone pillar, his once arrogant face now a mask of hollow defeat. No more grand promises, no more webs of manipulation, only the cold reality of judgment awaiting him at dawn. Turhan joined Orhan on the balcony, wiping soot from his face with a torn cloth. "The scouts have returned, my lord. The enemy has scattered into the hills, but not all have fled far. Some bands have regrouped in the deeper valleys, and farther east new dust clouds rise, larger forces. Perhaps the distant allies Shahanshah once called upon in his desperation. They move slowly, but they move. We cannot rest long." Orhan nodded, his gaze fixed on the darkened horizon. "Then we strike while the iron is hot and the enemy is still divided. At first light we send flying columns east under your command, Turhan. Harass their scouts, burn their camps, cut their supply lines before they can unite. The main host will remain here to secure the citadel and begin restoring order. The people must see that we bring justice, not merely conquest. Grain will be distributed. The wounded, both ours and theirs, will be tended. And Shahanshah, his judgment will be carried out at midday before the eyes of the city, so that every soul knows the cost of betrayal." Dawn came gray and heavy with the promise of rain. The host stirred early. Prayers echoed through the ruined streets as men knelt on whatever clean ground they could find. Shahanshah was brought forth into the central square, still in chains, surrounded by the captains and a silent crowd of citizens who had suffered under his rule. Orhan stood upon a raised platform, voice carrying clear and resonant across the gathered throng. "People of this city, you have endured hunger, fear, and the tyranny of false promises. Today, the man who caused your suffering answers for his crimes. He sowed betrayal in the forest. He starved his own people behind these walls. He sent assassins and traitors into our ranks. Justice demands his life, yet mercy tempers the blade. He will not die in secret. He will die in the light so that his end may serve as a warning and a beginning." Shahanshah was forced to his knees. He lifted his head one final time, eyes burning with hatred. "You call this justice, Orhan Sahib? You are no better than I. Your hands are stained with as much blood. One day, another will rise to judge you." Orhan's expression remained unyielding. "Perhaps, but I fight for rightful authority under the sight of the Almighty, not for personal power or golden lies. Your reign ends here." The execution was swift and solemn, no spectacle of cruelty, only the cold finality of justice. Shahanshah's head was raised upon a spear atop the highest remaining tower, a grim banner visible for miles. A great silence fell over the city, followed by murmurs of relief and quiet prayers of thanks. The people began to emerge more openly, accepting the bread and water distributed by Ottoman captains. Order, fragile but real, began to take root. By midday, Turhan rode out at the head of a strong flying column, 500 of the finest riders, including Damir Khan and fresh scouts under Zarkin and Killil. Their task was clear: probe the eastern hills, prevent the scattered enemy bands from regrouping, and slow the approach of the larger distant force. Orhan watched them depart from the outer gates, saber resting at his side. "Ride with the protection of the Most High," he called after them. "Strike hard, strike fast, and return with news. We will follow with the main host when the city is secure." The hours that followed were a blur of necessary labor. Engineers under Alauddin Sahib and Jarkata's replacement began repairing the worst damage to the walls. Abdul Rahman oversaw the distribution of supplies. Mustafa and Tamir Boga moved among the ranks, steadying morale with quiet words and shared prayers. News came from the surgeons. Faladios's fever had broken. The fierce commander would live, though it would be many weeks before he could wield his twin blades again. Yet even in these moments of fragile peace, shadows stirred. A captured enemy scout brought before Orhan in the late afternoon spoke under questioning of deeper treachery. "The lords to the east do not come only for plunder, my lord. They speak of old alliances with Shahanshah's bloodline. Some captains within your own host, they have received messages, whispers of pardon and new positions if they deliver the city back into chaos." One name was mentioned, Alauddin Sahib's cousin, a lesser officer who survived the earlier purges. "He waits for the moment when your main force marches east." Orhan's eyes hardened. He summoned the captains once more. "The serpent's body twitches still. We have cut off one head after another, Yakid in the forest, Kuleds before the walls, Jarkata upon the stairs, and now this. Root it out, double the watches. Let no man speak in private. Justice will be swift when the traitor reveals himself." As night fell once more, the citadel settled into an uneasy vigilance. Fires burned low in the squares. Prayers continued in steady rhythm. Orhan walked the battlements alone for a time, hand upon his blade, gazing toward the east where distant campfires flickered like malevolent eyes. "The war changes its face again," he murmured to the wind. "We have taken the city, we have judged the tyrant, but the greater storm gathers beyond the hills. New betrayals wait in the shadows of our own ranks. Yet we have endured the forest ambush, the long siege, the arrows that nearly claimed Faladios, and the fire that consumed Shahanshah's lies. The Almighty has guided us through every trial. He will not abandon us now." Far to the east, Tarhan's column moved silently through the darkness, striking small enemy camps with lightning speed, arrows whistling through the night, steel flashing in close quarters, chaos. Supply wagons set ablaze to light the hills like funeral pyres. Each successful raid bought the main host precious time. Back in the citadel, Burhan Faladios stirred on his pallet, whispering fevered vows to ride again soon. The people began to whisper the name of Orhan Sahib not with fear, but with cautious hope. Yet the epic was far from its end. New dust clouds rose on the horizon with every passing hour. Whispers of disloyalty lingered like smoke that refused to clear, and ahead lay harder marches, bloodier battles, and the constant test of whether loyalty could endure when the weight of endless war pressed upon every soul. Orhan Sahib stood upon the walls as the stars wheeled overhead, voice low but carrying the unbreakable rhythm of destiny. "The path of justice is long and paved with sacrifice. But we walk it still, through fire, through smoke, through steel and unyielding faith. Whatever new storm comes from the east, whatever hidden knife waits in the dark, we will meet it together. The Almighty writes the final chapter. We are merely the ink." The night deepened, the citadel stood watchful, and the long march of honor, betrayal, and rightful authority pressed relentlessly onward into the uncertain dawn, promising that the flames had not yet finished their work and the greatest tests still lay ahead. The night after the judgment of Shahanshah was thick with uneasy quiet. The citadel's walls, still scarred and blackened by fire, stood sentinel under a sky heavy with stars, yet the air carried the low murmur of a city that had not yet dared to believe its long nightmare was truly ending. Orhan Sahib walked the battlements alone for a time, his hand never far from the hilt of his saber, eyes turned toward the distant eastern hills where the faint glow of enemy campfires flickered like malevolent eyes refusing to close. Below in the central square, the people moved with cautious hope. Ottoman captains distributed what grain and water could be spared, while surgeons worked by torchlight on both their own wounded and those of the defeated. Prayers rose in steady, rhythmic waves from every corner, men kneeling wherever they could find space, invoking the name of the most merciful, the protector of the oppressed, the just judge who sees every hidden heart. In the inner chamber, Burhan Faladios lay propped against cushions, his fever broken but his body still weak from blood loss. The arrows had left deep wounds, yet his spirit remained a blade that refused to dull. When Orhan entered, Faladios managed to sit a little straighter, twin blades resting across his lap like loyal companions. "The city breathes again," Faladios said, voice hoarse but steady. I heard the people whispering your name with something other than fear tonight. That is victory, my lord, a victory worth every drop of blood spilled in the forest and before these walls. Orhan sat beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. You bought us that victory with your own blood, Burhan. The men fought like lions because they saw you ride out despite the surgeons' protests. Rest now. The eastern storm still gathers, but we have time you helped purchase. Faladios's eyes burned with the old fire. Time is a luxury we cannot afford for long. Send me east with Turhan when I can sit a horse again. My blades are not yet finished with this war. You will ride when you are ready, Orhan replied firmly. Until then, your presence here strengthens every heart in the citadel. The men need to see that even the fiercest among us can endure and return to the fight. Dawn broke gray and cool, carrying the promise of rain once more. The main host began to stir with disciplined purpose. Columns formed in the outer squares as Orhan addressed the captains and the gathered warriors from atop a captured siege platform. Sons of the faithful, his voice rang out deep and rhythmic, carrying the weight of sacred command. We have taken the city, we have judged the tyrant. Justice has begun its work, but the war does not end with one head upon a spear. New enemies gather beyond the hills, opportunistic lords who smell weakness and dream of plunder. We will not wait for them to come to us. We will carry the flame of justice to them. Turhan will lead the flying columns east to harass and disrupt. The rest of us will secure this city, restore order, and prepare the main host to march when the time is right. Let every man remember why we fight, not for gold or glory alone, but for rightful authority under the sight of the Almighty. Loyalty will be our shield. Steel will be our sword. A great cheer rose from the ranks, echoing off the cracked walls. Turhan rode out at the head of 500 riders as the sun climbed higher, Damir Khan, Zarkin, Killil, and fresh scouts at his side. Their task was merciless and clear. Strike the scattered enemy bands in the hills, burn their camps, cut their supply lines, and slow the approach of the larger distant force until the main host could join them. Orhan watched them depart from the outer gates, then turned his attention inward. The work of rebuilding began in earnest. Abdul Rahman oversaw the distribution of supplies and the repair of wells. Mustafa and Tamir Boga moved among the people, offering protection and justice to any who had suffered under Shahanshah's rule. Altuddin Sahib directed engineers to begin shoring up the most damaged sections of the walls. Order, fragile but growing, took root like new grass after fire. Yet shadows lingered. In the late afternoon, a lesser officer was brought before Orhan in chains. The man Al-Aliaddin Sahib's own cousin, a captain named Selim who had survived the earlier purges, had been caught attempting to send a rider toward the eastern hills with a sealed message. The scroll spoke of delivering the citadel back into chaos in exchange for pardon and high position under the new lords gathering beyond the hills. The betrayal was clear, the handwriting damning. Orhan confronted him in the central square before the gathered captains and a silent crowd. Selim, he said, voice low and heavy with sorrow rather than rage, you who once marched with us through the forest and the long siege, you saw Yakid fall, you saw Kuleds and Jarkata meet their ends, and still you chose the path of the serpent. Explain yourself before your brothers. Selim fell to his knees, trembling. The war has no end, my lord. The eastern lords promised safety, lands, and escape from this endless bleeding. I was weak. Forgive me. Weakness is the door through which treason enters, Orhan replied, echoing the words spoken so many times before. And the serpent always devours its host. You will face the judgment of the captains at first light. Let your end serve as the final warning to any who still waver. Justice was carried out at dawn the next day, solemn, public, and without cruelty. The example steeled the ranks. Whispers of disloyalty quieted. Morale, tested by long weeks of war, surged once more with the clarity that loyalty remained the unbreakable chain binding them together. Meanwhile, riders from Turhan's flying column began to return with news. They had struck 3 enemy camps in the hills, swift ambushes in the narrow defiles where the trees pressed close like silent witnesses. Wagons burned, scouts cut down in close quarters chaos, horses driven into the wild. The scattered bands were bleeding and scattering further, but the larger force farther east continued its slow, deliberate advance. They number nearly 8,000 now, one rider reported, breathing hard. They move under multiple banners, but a single purpose: plunder and revenge for Shahanshah's fall. They will reach the plain in 4 days if we do not slow them more. Orhan listened in the command chamber, Faladios now able to sit upright beside him, listening with burning eyes. Then we cannot wait behind these walls, Orhan said. We march east in 3 days. The city will be left under a strong garrison. The main host will move to meet the threat before it can fully form. We will encircle them as we did the citadel, cut supplies, sow fear, and let psychological warfare do what steel alone cannot. Faladios gripped the edge of his pallet. Take me with you, my lord. I can ride. My blades may be slow, but my presence will remind the men that even death could not claim me. Orhan placed a hand on his shoulder. You will ride when the surgeons allow it. Your survival is itself a banner. The men need to see that the righteous endure. When you are ready, you will lead the charge that breaks them. The days that followed blurred into a storm of preparation. The host gathered supplies, sharpened blades, and offered prayers without cease. The people of the city watched with a mixture of awe and quiet hope as their new rulers prepared to defend what they had won. Defectors from the eastern hills continued to trickle in, bringing tales of growing fear among the opportunistic lords, rumors that Orhan's justice was merciless to traitors yet merciful to the repentant. On the third dawn, the main host marched out of the citadel gates in a long, disciplined column. Banners snapped in the morning breeze, prayers rose like incense. Orhan rode at the fore. Turhan now returned from his raids to ride once more at his right hand. Behind them came the captains Mahmud, Abdulrahman, Mustafa, Tamir Boga, Altadin Saheb, each marked by the long war yet unbroken in spirit. Faladios followed in a litter at first, then insisted on mounting a gentle horse, his twin blades strapped across his back, his face pale but his eyes fierce. They moved east across the plain, the smoking citadel shrinking behind them like a chapter finally closed. The air carried the scent of pine from the approaching hills and the faint promise of new rain. Scouts rode ahead and returned with reports of the enemy host drawing closer, 8,000 strong, their lines still loose but growing more organized with every passing hour. As the sun climbed higher, the first clashes began. Tarhan's riders struck the enemy vanguard in lightning raids, arrows whistling through the trees, steel flashing in sudden, brutal close quarters fighting in the narrow passes. Smoke rose from burning supply wagons, lighting the hills like warning beacons. The enemy faltered but did not break. That night, as the host made camp in a wide valley, Orhan gathered his captains around a low fire. The flames cast flickering light across their weary faces. "The greater storm is upon us," he said, voice deep and rhythmic, carrying the weight of destiny. "The enemy comes not as one army but as many, greed binding them where loyalty never could. We will use their disunity against them. Encirclement, supply cuts, psychological warfare. Let them hear the tales of Shahanshah's end. Let them see our banners and remember the forest, the siege, and the plain where we broke their brothers. We fight not for conquest alone, but for a lasting peace under rightful authority." Faladios, sitting upright despite the pain, added his voice, "And when they charge, I will be there. My blades may tremble, but my heart does not. Let them come. Justice has waited long enough." The captains raised their voices in agreement, oaths sworn upon the holy words and upon the steel they carried. Yet even as the fire crackled and prayers rose into the night sky, a final shadow stirred. A captured scout from the enemy host revealed under questioning that one last planted agent remained within Orhan's ranks, a captain whose name had never been spoken aloud, waiting for the moment of greatest strain during the coming battle to strike from within, perhaps opening a gap in the lines or signaling the enemy at the critical hour. Orhan listened in silence, then crushed the report in his fist. "The serpent's last whisper, we will expose it when it moves. Until then, every man watches his brother and every brother watches himself. Loyalty will be our shield." The night deepened, the camp settled into vigilant rest, prayers continued in rhythmic waves, and in the distance, the fires of the approaching enemy glowed like the eyes of a beast stirring from long sleep. The long epic marched onward once more, through smoke, through steel, through fire and unyielding faith, toward whatever new trials and new reckonings fate still prepared beyond the hills. The war had changed its face again, but the flame of justice burned brighter than ever, promising that whatever betrayal, whatever storm, whatever final duel still awaited, the righteous would meet it together beneath the eternal, ever-watchful sky. The march continued, the blades remained sharp, and the dawn of the next great battle drew steadily nearer. The valley camp stirred before the first light of the seventh dawn since the fall of the citadel. Orhan Sahib stood at the edge of the firelight, cloak drawn tight against the chill mountain wind that swept down from the eastern hills. The host was already forming ranks, thousands of weary yet resolute warriors, their banners snapping softly in the pre-dawn gloom. Prayers rose in a steady, rhythmic murmur, the low cadence of men invoking the most merciful, the protector in battle, the just who weighs every soul. Tarhan approached, leading his stallion, face still marked by the dust and blood of yesterday's raids. "The scouts have returned, my lord. The enemy host has consolidated. Nearly 8,000 now, spread across 3 ridges ahead. Their lines are still loose, different banners, different lords arguing over command, but they outnumber us almost 2 to 1. They plan to descend into this valley at first light and overwhelm us before we can fully form." Orhan's gaze remained fixed on the dark silhouettes of the hills. "Then we will not wait for them to descend. We advance to meet them on the high ground, form the host into 3 columns. Mahmud, take the left wing and anchor it against the rocky outcrop. Abdul Rahman, command the right and prepare to swing wide. Mustafa and Tamir Boga lead the center with me. Zarkin and Killil position the archers on the forward slopes. Tarhan, keep your riders ready as a striking force." We will use the terrain as we used the forest and the citadel walls, encirclement, smoke, and the blade of psychological warfare. He turned to the assembled captains, voice rising clear and powerful so that every man within earshot could hear. Sons of the faithful, the jackals come for plunder and revenge. They believe us weakened by the long siege and the arrows that nearly claimed our brother Faladios. But they forget we have walked through fire and betrayal together. We have seen traitors fall and justice prevail. Today we teach them that loyalty forged in blood cannot be broken by numbers alone. Fight with honor, fight with faith. And let every strike carry the name of the Almighty. A thunderous roar answered him, echoing off the hills like the voice of destiny itself. The host moved forward as the sky lightened to a pale gray. Orhan Faladios rode near the center despite the surgeon's protests, pale and bandaged but sitting straight in the saddle, twin blades strapped across his back. His presence alone sent a visible surge through the ranks, whispers of the fierce one still rides spreading like wind through dry grass. They met the enemy on the middle ridge just as the sun broke fully over the horizon. The opportunistic host poured down the slopes in a disordered but massive wave, cavalry charging first, followed by dense blocks of infantry. Horns blared from both sides, the air filled with the thunder of hooves and the whistle of arrows. Zarkin and Killal's archers unleashed devastating volleys from the forward slopes, darkening the sky and thinning the enemy vanguard. Hundreds fell before the two lines even met. Then the crash came, steel against steel, a savage roar that swallowed the valley. Orhan fought in the center, saber flashing as he cut down rider after rider. His stallion wheeled and reared, trampling fallen banners. "Hold the line," he shouted, voice cutting through the din. "For justice and for the fallen, Allahu Akbar." Tarhan led a lightning countercharge on the right, his riders slamming into the enemy flank like a hammer. Sabers sang, horses collided with bone-crushing force, and the air filled with the wet sounds of battle. "For Faladios," he roared, "for every brother lost in the forest and before the walls." On the left, Mahmud's wing held firm against a heavy press, his bandaged leg braced against the stirrup as he directed his men with calm authority. Abdul Rahman swung wide on the right, attempting to envelop the enemy as planned. Smoke became the turning point once more. Enemy archers set the dry grass ablaze in several places, hopping to create chaos and blind the Ottoman lines. Thick black plumes rolled across the ridge, choking lungs and turning friend and foe into silhouettes of fury. Close quarters fighting descended into primal savagery, men grappling in the smoke, daggers finding throats, spears thrusting blindly. In the heart of that choking inferno, Orhan Faladios met a personal reckoning. A burly bey from the eastern lords charged him directly, mace raised high, screaming curses against Orhan's name. Faladios, weakened but unbowed, parried the heavy blow with one blade and drove the second straight into the man's chest in a crossing strike. The bey fell with a gurgling cry, and a cheer rose from the nearby warriors. "The fierce one strikes again," the cry went up. Faladios's blades, though slower than before, still carved death with deadly precision. Yet the enemy numbers pressed hard. The Ottoman center began to buckle under the sheer weight of the assault. Mustafa took a deep cut across the shoulder but refused to fall. Tamir Boga planted his feet like an oak and held a breech, shield splintering under repeated blows. Orhan saw the danger and raised his voice like a clarion. "Tarhan, now strike their rear and drive the flanks inward, encircle them as we did the citadel." Tarhan's riders swept around the right flank in a thunderous arc, cutting deep into the enemy's disordered rear. At the same moment, Abdul Rahman completed his wide swing, closing the jaws of the trap. The enemy host, already fractured by competing lords, began to fracture further. Panic spread like the grass fires, men throwing down weapons, leaders shouting contradictory orders, entire units breaking and fleeing back up the slopes. The battle turned decisively. Ottoman warriors pressed the advantage, driving the enemy higher into the hills with relentless pressure. Smoke continued to billow, but now it served the righteous cause, choking the retreating foe while the faithful advanced. By midday, the ridge belonged to Orhan's host. Thousands of the enemy lay dead or wounded across the slopes. The survivors fled deeper into the eastern valleys, their once confident banners torn and trampled. The opportunistic lords who had dreamed of easy plunder now rode for their lives, their dreams of revenge shattered upon the same steel that had ended Shahanshah. Orhan rode among his men as the fighting died down, offering quiet words of strength and invoking the name of the Almighty. The cost had been heavy, more good men fallen, more wounds reopened, but the victory was complete. Faladios still sat his horse, breathing hard but alive, his bandages stained fresh red yet his eyes shining with triumph. That night, as the host made camp upon the captured ridge, Orhan gathered the captains around a central fire. The flames cast flickering light across soot-streaked faces. "We have broken their vanguard," he said, voice deep and resonant, carrying the rhythmic power of one who spoke as history itself. "But the greater body still retreats eastward. They will regroup, perhaps call upon even more distant allies. We cannot rest. Tomorrow we press the pursuit, cut their supplies, sow fear with tales of Shahansh's end and the justice that awaits all traitors. Let psychological warfare finish what steel has begun." Faladios, seated near the fire with his blades across his knees, added his voice. "And when they turn to fight again, I will be there. My wounds ache, but my oath does not. The war that began in the darkness of the forest will end only when every last shadow of betrayal is burned away." A scout arrived then, breathing hard from a hard ride. He dropped to one knee. "My lord, deeper in the eastern valleys, a new force gathers. Not opportunistic lords this time, but something more organized. They fly banners of old houses that once swore fealty to Shahansh's bloodline. They number perhaps 4,000 and march to link with the remnants we just broke. They come for vengeance, and they speak of one final planted traitor within our ranks who will signal them when the moment is right." Orhan's expression did not change, but his eyes hardened like forged steel. "Then the last serpent still moves. We will expose it when it strikes. Until then, every watch is doubled. Every man watches his brother with love and vigilance. Justice has claimed Yakid, Kulad's, Jarkata, Selim, and Shahanshah himself. It will claim this final shadow as well." The captains raised their voices in solemn agreement, oaths sworn anew upon steel and upon the holy words. As the night deepened and the fires burned low, Orhan stood once more at the edge of the camp, gazing eastward where new fires glowed in the distant valleys. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and smoke, and somewhere in the darkness, the last hidden traitor waited for his moment. "The path is long," Orhan murmured to the night itself, "and paved with the bones of the unfaithful. But we walk it still, through forest and flame, through siege and open battle, through betrayal and through blood. The Almighty guides the ink with which history is written. We are merely the hands that hold the pen." Prayers continued to rise into the starlit sky. Blades were sharpened against whetstones with rhythmic scrapes. Wounded men groaned softly as surgeons worked by firelight, and in the distance the greater storm gathered strength once more. The long epic pressed relentlessly onward, through fire, through smoke, through steel and unyielding faith, toward whatever final reckonings and new dawns fate still prepared in the shadowed valleys ahead. The war had not ended. It had only grown larger, its tendrils reaching deeper into the heart of loyalty and destiny. Yet the flame of rightful authority burned brighter than ever, a beacon against the gathering dark, promising that whatever last betrayal, whatever final duel, whatever greater host still waited beyond the hills, the righteous would meet it together, unbroken and unbowed, beneath the eternal gaze of heaven. The march would continue at first light, the blades remained sharp, and the story of honor, justice, and enduring faith marched forward into the uncertain dawn. The host broke camp before the stars had fully faded from the sky. Orhan Sahib rode at the head of the long column, his stallions' hooves striking sparks from the rocky path as they climbed higher into the eastern hills. The air was sharp with pine and the lingering scent of yesterday's grass fires. Behind him stretched the main body of the army, thousands of men marching in disciplined silence, banners low to avoid catching the wind, prayers murmured in steady rhythm like the heartbeat of a single living thing. Orhan Faladios rode near the center now, still pale and bandaged, but upright in the saddle with his twin blades strapped across his back. Each jolt of the horse brought a flicker of pain across his face, yet he refused the litter. "If I cannot ride with my brothers," he had said at dawn, "then I am already dead." No one argued with him anymore. Orhan ranged ahead with his flying column, striking hard and fast at every enemy scout or supply party foolish enough to linger in the narrow valleys. The hills echoed with distant clashes, arrows whistling through the trees, steel ringing in sudden ambushes, the roar of burning wagons lighting the pre-dawn gloom like funeral pyres. Each successful raid bought the main host precious time and sowed fresh fear among the retreating foe. By mid-morning they reached the crest of a high ridge overlooking a wide, forested valley. Below them, the remnants of the opportunistic host had begun to regroup, now joined by the new force flying the old banners of Shahanshah's distant blood allies. Nearly 12,000 men in total, their lines still ragged but growing more dangerous by the hour as rival lords argued over command. Orhan raised his hand, the column halted. He studied the enemy formation with calm, calculating eyes. "They outnumber us still," he said quietly to the captains gathered around him, "but they fight for greed and old grudges. We fight for justice and the future of these lands. Use the terrain. Mama, take the left wing and anchor it on the rocky spur. Abdul Rahman, swing the right wide through the trees and prepare to envelop. Mustafa and Tamir Boga, hold the center with me. Zarkin and Killil, position the archers along the ridge line. Tarhin, keep your riders hidden in the forest on the flank. When the moment comes, strike their rear like the wolf we unleashed in the first forest ambush." He turned to the entire host, voice rising strong and resonant so that it carried down the slopes. Sons of the faithful, look upon the enemy below. They come for plunder and revenge, believing that numbers and old blood can undo what we have built with blood and faith. But they forget the forest where Yakid fell. They forget the citadel where Shahansh's head now decorates the highest tower. They forget the plain where we broke their brothers and the ridge where Faladio's rode despite arrows meant to kill him. Today we remind them again. Fight with honor, fight with prayer upon your lips. Let every strike be a declaration that rightful authority cannot be broken by steel or betrayal. A mighty roar answered him, rolling down the valley like thunder. The enemy spotted the banners on the ridge and began to advance, horns blaring in a discordant chorus. Their cavalry charged first, thundering up the slopes in a disordered wave. Zarkin and Killal's archers met them with disciplined volleys, thinning the ranks before the two armies even met. Then the lines crashed together in a storm of steel and chaos. Orhan fought in the center, saber flashing as he parried and struck with measured fury. "Hold," he shouted above the din, "for the Almighty and for the righteous cause." Smoke rose once more as the enemy set fire to the dry underbrush, hopping to blind and panic the Ottoman lines. Thick plumes rolled across the battlefield, turning the valley into a hellish vision of flame and shadow. Close quarters fighting became savage, men grappling in the choking haze, daggers seeking throats, horses screaming as they collided. On the left, Mahmud's wing held firm against a heavy press, his voice steady as he directed his men. On the right, Abdul Rahman pushed through the trees, slowly swinging inward to threaten the enemy flank. In the heart of the smoke, Burhan Faladios dueled another Eastern Bey who had charged straight at him, screaming for revenge. The fierce commander, weakened but unbreakable, parried the man's wild swings with one blade and drove the second home with lethal precision. The Bey fell, and the cry "Faladios still strikes" spread like fire through the ranks, lifting weary hearts. Tarhan waited for the perfect moment, hidden in the forest on the far flank. When the enemy's center began to buckle under the pressure, he unleashed his riders in a thunderous charge that slammed into the rear like divine wrath. "For justice," he roared, "for every fallen brother." The encirclement closed. The enemy, already fractured by competing lords and old grudges, began to shatter. Panic spread faster than the grass fires. Units broke and fled deeper into the valley, many cut down as they ran. The Ottoman host pressed the advantage relentlessly, driving the remnants back across the valley floor. By late afternoon, the battle was decided. The enemy host lay broken, thousands dead or wounded, the survivors scattering into the deeper forests and hills in small, terrified bands. The old banners of Shahanshah's blood allies lay trampled in the mud and ash. Orhan rode among his victorious but exhausted men, offering quiet words of strength and leading prayers of thanks. The cost had been heavy once more wounds, more graves to be dug, but the victory was decisive. Faladios still sat his horse, breathing hard, his bandages freshly stained, yet his eyes shone with fierce satisfaction. That night, as the host made camp in the captured valley, Orhan gathered the captains around a central fire. The flames danced across soot-streaked faces marked by fatigue and triumph. "We have broken them again," Orhan said, his voice deep and rhythmic, carrying the weight of destiny. "The opportunistic lords flee like shadows before the dawn. The blood allies of the old tyrant are scattered, but we must not grow complacent. Deeper east, new forces may still gather, and the last hidden traitor among us has not yet revealed himself. We press onward at first light. We will hunt the remnants, cut every supply line, and let fear finish what our blades have begun." Faladios, seated near the fire, added his voice, though it was weaker now. "And when the final battle comes, I will ride at your side, my lord. My blades may tremble, but my oath does not. The war that began in darkness will end in light, by fire, by steel, and by unyielding faith." A scout arrived then, dust-covered and breathing hard. He knelt before Orhan. "My lord, deeper in the eastern mountains, a new host is forming. Not scattered lords this time, but a more organized army, perhaps 6,000 strong under a single commander who claims distant kinship with Shahanshah. They march to avenge the fallen tyrant and retake the citadel. They speak openly of one final planted traitor within our ranks who will signal them at the moment of greatest strain, opening a gap in our lines or delivering false orders that could turn the tide." Orhan listened in silence, then slowly crushed the report in his fist. His eyes reflected the firelight like tempered steel. "The last shadow stirs. We have slain Yakid in the forest, Kuleds before the walls, Jarkata upon the stairs, Selim in the square, and now this final whisper. When he moves, we will be ready. Until then, every man watches his brother with love and vigilance. Justice has claimed many heads, it will claim this one as well." The captain swore fresh oaths, voices low and solemn around the fire. As the night deepened and the fires burned lower, Orhan stood once more at the edge of the camp, gazing eastward where new distant fires glowed like the eyes of a beast that refused to die. "The path grows longer still," he murmured to the wind and the stars. "We have endured the forest ambush, the long siege, the arrows that nearly took Faladios, the judgment of Shahansha, and now these endless battles in the hills. Each trial has forged us stronger. The Almighty writes with our hands, we are the ink of justice." Prayers continued to rise into the night sky. Blades were honed against whetstones with rhythmic scrapes. Wounded men were tended by firelight, and in the darkness the last hidden traitor waited, coiled like the final serpent, for his moment to strike. The long epic marched onward once more, through smoke, through fire, through steel and unyielding faith, toward whatever final confrontation and new dawn awaited in the shadowed mountains ahead. The war had grown larger, its tendrils reaching into the deepest valleys of loyalty and destiny. Yet the flame of rightful authority burned brighter with every trial, a beacon that no darkness could fully extinguish. The march would resume at first light. The blades remained sharp, and the story of honor, betrayal, and enduring justice pressed relentlessly forward into the uncertain night, promising that whatever last betrayal, whatever final duel, whatever greater host still gathered beyond the mountains, the righteous would meet it together, unbroken, unbowed, and guided by the eternal light of heaven. The march eastward continued under a sky heavy with gathering clouds. The host moved like a great serpent of steel and faith, winding through the narrow mountain valleys, banners low, voices lifted in quiet prayer. Orhan Sahib rode at the fore, his stallion picking its way carefully over rocky ground, eyes scanning the ridges above for any sign of ambush. Behind him stretched the long column, thousands of battle-hardened warriors, their faces marked by soot, blood, and unyielding resolve. Orhan Faladios rode near the center, still pale and bandaged, but refusing any assistance. Each jolt of the saddle brought fresh pain, yet his twin blades remained strapped across his back like an oath that could not be broken. Tarhan and his flying riders ranged far ahead and on the flanks, striking at every enemy scout or small band foolish enough to linger in the passes. The hills echoed with distant clashes, arrows singing through the trees, steel ringing in sudden, brutal skirmishes, the roar of burning supply wagons lighting the gray morning like warning beacons. Each successful raid weakened the enemy and bought the main host precious time. By midday they reached a wide, forested plateau where the valley opened into a natural amphitheater ringed by steep ridges. Below them the new host had formed, 6,000 strong under a single commander who claimed distant kinship with Shahansha. Their banners flew boldly now, a mix of old royal colors and the symbols of vengeful houses. They had chosen the ground well, anchoring their lines against the high ground with a river at their back. Orhan halted the column on the plateau's edge and studied the enemy formation in silence. The captains gathered around him. "They outnumber us," Tarhan said quietly, "but their lines are still brittle. Different houses, old grudges, one strong blow in the right place could shatter them." Orhan nodded. "Then we give them that blow. Mama, take the left wing and press against the rocky spur. Abdul Rahman, lead the right through the forest and prepare to swing inward. Mustafa and Tamir Boga, hold the center with me. Zarkin and Killil, position the archers along the forward ridge. Tarhan, keep your riders hidden in the tree line on the far left. When the center engages, strike their rear and drive the flanks together. We encircle them as we did at the citadel and on the previous ridge. Let smoke and fear do the rest." He turned to the entire host, raising his voice so that it carried down the slopes like a call to prayer amid storm. "Sons of the faithful, look upon the enemy below. They march under the banners of a dead tyrant, seeking revenge for a reign built on lies and betrayal. They believe numbers and old blood can undo what we have forged through fire and sacrifice. But they forget the forest where Yakid fell. They forget the arrows that failed to kill Faladios. They forget the citadel where Shahansha's head now rots upon the tower. Today we remind them again. Fight with honor, fight with faith. Let every strike be a declaration that rightful authority cannot be broken by steel or shadow." A thunderous roar answered him, rolling across the plateau and down into the valley. The enemy spotted the banners and began to advance, horns blaring in a harsh chorus. Their cavalry charged first, thundering up the slopes in a dense wave. Zarkin and Killil's archers met them with disciplined volleys, thinning the ranks before the two armies clashed. Then the lines crashed together in a maelstrom of steel and chaos. Orhan fought in the center, saber flashing as he parried and struck with measured fury. "Hold the line," he shouted above the din, "for the Almighty and for the righteous cause." Smoke became the turning point once more. The enemy set fire to the dry underbrush in several places, hopping to create panic and blind the Ottoman advance. Thick black plumes rolled across the battlefield, turning the plateau into a hellish vision of flame and shadow. Close quarters fighting descended into primal savagery, men grappling in the choking haze, daggers seeking throats, spears thrusting blindly where friend and foe blurred together. On the left, Mahmud's wing held firm against a heavy press, his voice steady as he directed his men. On the right, Abdul Rahman pushed through the trees, slowly swinging inward to threaten the enemy flank. In the heart of the smoke, Burhan Faladios jeweled a captain of the enemy's elite guard who had charged straight at him, screaming curses against Orhan's name. The fierce commander, weakened but unbreakable, parried the man's wild swings with one blade and drove the second home with lethal precision. The captain fell, and the cry "Faladios still rides" spread like wildfire through the ranks, lifting weary hearts and steeling tired arms. Tarhan waited for the perfect moment, hidden in the tree line. When the enemy's center began to buckle under the relentless pressure, he unleashed his riders in a thunderous charge that slammed into the rear like the hand of divine wrath. "For justice," he roared, "for every brother lost in the long war." The encirclement closed. The enemy host, already fractured by competing loyalties and old grudges, began to shatter completely. Panic spread faster than the grass fires. Units broke and fled back toward the river, many cut down as they ran. The Ottoman host pressed the advantage without mercy, driving the remnants across the valley floor in a chaotic rout. By late afternoon, the plateau and the valley belonged to Orhan's host. Thousands of the enemy lay dead or wounded across the slopes and the riverbank. The survivors fled deeper into the eastern mountains in small, terrified bands, their once-proud banners trampled into the mud and ash. Orhan rode among his victorious but exhausted men, offering quiet words of strength and leading prayers of gratitude. The cost had been heavy once more wounds reopened, more graves to be dug at dusk, but the victory was decisive. Faladios still sat his horse, breathing hard, his bandages freshly stained, yet his eyes burned with fierce satisfaction. That night, as the host made camp upon the hard-won plateau, Orhan gathered the captains around a central fire. The flames danced across soot-streaked faces marked by fatigue and hard-won triumph. "We have broken them again," Orhan said, his voice deep and rhythmic, carrying the weight of destiny itself. "The blood allies of the old tyrant are scattered. Their dreams of vengeance lie broken upon these slopes, but we must not grow complacent. Deeper in the eastern mountains, new forces may still gather, and the last hidden traitor among us has not yet shown his face. We press onward at first light. We will hunt the remnants, cut every supply line, and let fear and justice finish what our blades have begun." Faladios, seated near the fire with his blades across his knees, spoke in a voice still weak but filled with iron. "And when the final confrontation comes, I will be there, my lord. My body aches, but my oath does not. The war that began in the darkness of the forest will end only when every last shadow of betrayal is burned away." A scout arrived then, dust-covered and breathing hard from a hard night ride. He dropped to one knee before Orhan. "My lord, deeper in the eastern mountains, beyond the next pass, a final host is gathering. Not scattered lords this time, but a more disciplined army, perhaps 5,000 strong, under a commander who claims to be the last true heir of Shahanshah's line. They march with purpose and speak openly of one final planted traitor within our ranks who will signal them at the moment of greatest strain, opening a gap in our lines, or delivering false orders that could turn victory into disaster." Orhan listened in silence, then slowly crushed the report in his fist. His eyes reflected the firelight like tempered steel fresh from the forge. "The last serpent still moves. We have slain Yakid in the forest, Kuleds before the walls, Jarkata upon the stairs, Selim in the square, and now this final whisper. When he moves, we will be ready. Until then, every watch is doubled. Every man watches his brother with love and vigilance. Justice has claimed many heads, it will claim this one as well." The captain swore fresh oaths around the fire, voices low and solemn. As the night deepened and the fires burned lower, Orhan stood once more at the edge of the camp, gazing eastward where new distant fires glowed like the eyes of a beast that refused to die quietly. "The path grows longer still," he murmured to the wind and the stars above. "We have endured the forest ambush, the long siege, the arrows that nearly took Faladios, the judgment of Shahanshah, the battles upon the ridges, and now this valley. Each trial has forged us stronger. The Almighty writes with our hands. We are the ink with which justice is written upon the pages of history." Prayers continued to rise into the night sky in rhythmic waves. Blades were honed against whetstones with steady scrapes. Wounded men were tended by firelight. And somewhere in the darkness of the camp, the last hidden traitor waited, coiled like the final serpent, for his moment to strike from within. The long epic marched onward once more, through smoke, through fire, through steel and unyielding faith, toward whatever final confrontation and new dawn awaited in the shadowed mountains ahead. The war had grown larger and more desperate, its tendrils reaching into the deepest valleys of loyalty and destiny. Yet the flame of rightful authority burned brighter with every trial, a beacon that no darkness could fully extinguish. The march would resume at first light. The blades remained sharp, and the story of honor, betrayal, justice, and enduring faith pressed relentlessly forward into the uncertain night, promising that whatever last betrayal, whatever final duel, whatever greater host still gathered beyond the mountains, the righteous would meet it together, unbroken, unbowed, and guided by the eternal light of heaven. The night deepened, the fires crackled low, and the dawn of the next, perhaps final, great battle drew steadily nearer. The host moved forward at first light like a river of steel and prayer, winding deeper into the eastern mountains where the passes grew narrower and the shadows longer. Orhan Sahib rode at the head, his eyes scanning every ridge and treeline for signs of ambush. The air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. Behind him, the long column stretched for miles, thousands of warriors marching in disciplined silence, their banners furled to avoid catching the wind, their lips moving in quiet invocations to the most merciful and the protector of the faithful. Orhan Faladios rode near the center, still pale and tightly bandaged but refusing any help. Each step of his horse sent fresh pain through his body, yet his twin blades remained strapped across his back like an unbreakable vow. "I will not be carried into the final battle," he had said at dawn. "If I fall, let it be in the saddle beside my brothers." Tarhan and his flying riders continued to range ahead and on the flanks, striking hard at every enemy scout or lingering band. The mountains echoed with the distant sounds of lightning raids, arrows whistling through the trees, steel clashing in sudden close-quarters chaos, the roar of burning wagons lighting the gray passes like beacons of warning. By mid-morning they reached the mouth of a wide, rocky defile known locally as the Valley of Echoes. The final enemy host had chosen this ground deliberately, 5,000 disciplined warriors under a commander who called himself the last true heir of Shahanshah's bloodline. They had formed a strong defensive position across the valley floor, anchored against steep cliffs on one side and a fast-flowing river on the other. Their banners flew boldly now, a mix of old royal colors and new symbols of vengeance. Orhan halted the column and studied the enemy lines in silence. The captains gathered around him. "They have chosen well," Tarhan said quietly. "The cliffs protect their left, the river their right. A direct assault will be costly." Orhan nodded slowly. "Then we will not assault directly, we will make them come to us. Mahmud, take the left wing and anchor it against the rocky outcrop. Abdul Rahman, lead the right through the narrow forest path and prepare to swing wide. Mustafa and Tamir Boga, hold the center with me. Zarkin and Killil, position the archers on the high ground above the defile. Tarhan, keep your riders hidden in the side canyons. When the enemy commits to the attack, strike their rear and close the trap. We will use smoke and the echo of these mountains to sow confusion and fear. Let them remember the forest where this war began." He turned to the entire host, raising his voice so that it carried down the column like a call to prayer in the midst of storm. "Sons of the faithful, look upon the enemy below. They march under the banners of a dead tyrant, seeking to undo what we have built with blood and faith. They believe this valley will be their redemption, but they forget the forest where Yaqid fell. They forget the arrows that failed to kill Faladios. They forget the citadel where Shahanshah's head now rots upon the tower. They forget every ridge and every plain where we have broken their brothers. Today we remind them one final time. Fight with honor, fight with faith. Let every strike be a declaration that rightful authority cannot be broken by steel, by numbers, or by the last shadows of betrayal." A mighty roar answered him, echoing off the cliffs and filling the Valley of Echoes like thunder from heaven itself. The enemy spotted the banners and began to advance, horns blaring in a harsh, defiant chorus. Their infantry moved forward in tight formation, shields locked, while cavalry waited on the flanks for an opening. Zarkin and Killil's archers unleashed devastating volleys from the high ground, arrows raining down like judgment. Hundreds fell before the two armies even met. Then the lines crashed together in a storm of steel and chaos. Orhan fought in the center, saber flashing as he parried and struck with measured fury. "Hold the line," he shouted above the din, "for the Almighty and for the righteous cause." Smoke became the turning point once more. The enemy set fire to dry brush and pitch pots along their front, hoping to blind and panic the Ottoman advance. Thick black plumes rolled through the defile, turning the battlefield into a hellish vision of flame and shadow. The cliffs amplified every sound, screams, clashing steel, and the roar of fire, creating a deafening echo that disoriented both sides. Close quarters fighting descended into primal savagery, men grappling in the choking haze, daggers seeking throats, spears thrusting blindly where friend and foe blurred together. On the left, Mahmud's wing held firm against a heavy press, his voice steady as he directed his men. On the right, Abdul Rahman pushed through the narrow forest path, slowly swinging inward to threaten the enemy flank. In the heart of the smoke and echoing chaos, Orhan Faladios dueled the enemy commander's personal champion, a towering warrior who charged straight at him, screaming for revenge. The fierce commander, weakened but unbreakable, parried the man's powerful blows with one blade and drove the second home with lethal precision. The champion fell with a gurgling cry, and the shout "Falladio still strikes" spread like wildfire through the ranks, lifting weary hearts and steeling tired arms. Tarhan waited for the perfect moment, hidden in the side canyons. When the enemy center began to buckle under the relentless pressure, he unleashed his riders in a thunderous charge that slammed into the rear like the hand of divine wrath. "For justice," he roared, "for every brother lost in the long war." The encirclement closed. The echoing cliffs magnified the panic. The enemy host, already strained by the difficult terrain and the weight of old grudges, began to shatter completely. Units broke and fled toward the river, many cut down as they ran or swept away by the fast current. The Ottoman host pressed the advantage without mercy, driving the remnants deeper into the defile in a chaotic rout. By late afternoon, the Valley of Echoes belonged to Orhan's host. Thousands of the enemy lay dead or wounded across the rocky ground and along the riverbank. The survivors fled in small, terrified bands deeper into the eastern mountains, their banners trampled and their dreams of vengeance shattered upon the same steel that had ended Shahanshah. Orhan rode among his victorious but exhausted men, offering quiet words of strength and leading prayers of gratitude. The cost had been heavy once more wounds, more graves to be dug at dusk, but the victory was decisive. Falladio still sat his horse, breathing hard, his bandages freshly stained, yet his eyes burned with fierce satisfaction. That night, as the host made camp upon the hard-won valley floor, Orhan gathered the captains around a central fire. The flames danced across soot-streaked faces marked by fatigue and hard-won triumph. "We have broken them again," Orhan said, his voice deep and rhythmic, carrying the weight of destiny itself. "The last heir of the old tyrant is scattered. Their dreams of vengeance lie broken upon these stones, but we must not grow complacent. The mountains may still hide remnants, and the last hidden traitor among us has not yet revealed himself. We press onward at first light. We will hunt the remnants, cut every supply line, and let justice finish what our blades have begun." Falladio, seated near the fire with his blades across his knees, spoke in a voice still weak but filled with iron. "And when the final confrontation comes, I will be there, my lord. My body aches, but my oath does not. The war that began in the darkness of the forest will end only when every last shadow of betrayal is burned away." A scout arrived then, breathing hard from a hard ride through the night. He dropped to one knee before Orhan. "My lord, deeper in the eastern mountains, beyond the next pass, the remnants have gathered one final time. Perhaps 3,000 strong under the last surviving captains of Shahanshah's inner circle. They have chosen a narrow pass for their stand. They speak openly of one final planted traitor within our ranks who will signal them at the moment of greatest strain, opening a gap in our lines or delivering false orders that could turn victory into disaster." Orhan listened in silence, then slowly crushed the report in his fist. His eyes reflected the firelight like tempered steel fresh from the forge. "The last serpent still moves. We have slain Yakid in the forest, Kuleds before the walls, Jarkata upon the stairs, Selim in the square, and now this final whisper. When he moves, we will be ready. Until then, every watch is doubled. Every man watches his brother with love and vigilance. Justice has claimed many heads, it will claim this one as well." The captain swore fresh oaths around the fire, voices low and solemn. As the night deepened and the fires burned lower, Orhan stood once more at the edge of the camp, gazing eastward where the narrow pass waited like the final gate of destiny. "The path grows longer still," he murmured to the wind and the stars above. "We have endured the forest ambush, the long siege, the arrows that nearly took Falladios, the judgment of Shahanshah, the battles upon the ridges, the valley, and now this defile. Each trial has forged us stronger. The Almighty writes with our hands. We are the ink with which justice is written upon the pages of history." Prayers continued to rise into the night sky in rhythmic waves. Blades were honed against whetstones with steady scrapes. Wounded men were tended by firelight. And somewhere in the darkness of the camp, the last hidden traitor waited, coiled like the final serpent, for his moment to strike from within. The long epic marched onward once more, through smoke, through fire, through steel and unyielding faith, toward whatever final confrontation and new dawn awaited in the shadowed pass ahead. The war had reached its most desperate and decisive phase, its tendrils reaching into the deepest valleys of loyalty and destiny. Yet the flame of rightful authority burned brighter with every trial, a beacon that no darkness could fully extinguish. The march would resume at first light. The blades remained sharp, and the story of honor, betrayal, justice, and enduring faith pressed relentlessly forward into the uncertain night, promising that whatever last betrayal, whatever final duel, whatever greater host still gathered beyond the pass, the righteous would meet it together, unbroken, unbowed, and guided by the eternal light of heaven. The night deepened, the fires crackled low, and the dawn of the final great battle drew steadily nearer. The final dawn broke cold and merciless over the narrow pass the enemy had chosen for their last stand. The Valley of Echoes lay behind them now, its blood-soaked stones already fading into memory. Ahead rose the Iron Pass, a jagged throat of rock barely wide enough for 3 horsemen abreast, with sheer cliffs on both sides that turned every shout into thunder and every clash of steel into the roar of judgment itself. Orhan Sahib reined in at the mouth of the pass. The host formed behind him in tight, disciplined ranks, banners snapping in the sharp mountain wind. Prayers rose in a low, steady chant, hundreds of voices joined as one, invoking the most merciful, the protector of the righteous, the just who sees every hidden heart and every final betrayal. The enemy waited within the pass, 3,000 of the hardest remnants, the last captains of Shahanshah's inner circle, fanatical guards who had nothing left to lose, and desperate survivors who still clung to the dream of restoring the old tyrant's bloodline. They had blocked the narrowest point with fallen boulders and sharpened stakes, their archers lined along the cliffs above, their infantry packed shoulder to shoulder in a wall of shields and spears. Their commander, a gaunt, wild-eyed man who called himself the Last Heir, stood beneath a tattered royal banner, sword raised high. Orhan studied the trap they had set and spoke quietly to his captains. They want us to bleed ourselves against their barricades. We will not give them that gift. Mahmud, take the left and press the base of the left cliff. Abdul Rahman, lead the right and hug the right wall. Mustafa and Tamir Boga, hold the center with me and draw their fire. Zarkin and Killil, take the best archers and climbers and clear the heights. Tarhin, keep your riders ready in the rear. When the cliffs are ours and the enemy turns to look up, strike through any gap we create. Faladios, stay close to the center. Your presence alone is worth 1,000 fresh swords today. He turned to the entire host, his voice rising clear and powerful, echoing off the cliffs so that every man heard the words as if spoken directly to his soul. Sons of the faithful, this is the last gate. Behind these rocks stand the final shadows of a reign built on betrayal and lies. They have nowhere left to run. Today we finish what began in the darkness of the forest. Today we close the circle that started with Yakid's treachery and ends with the last whisper of his master's poison. Fight not with rage alone, but with faith. Let every strike be a prayer. Let every fallen brother be honored by our victory. The Almighty sees us. The Almighty guides us. Forward for justice, for rightful authority, and for the dawn that comes after the final night. A roar erupted from the host, raw, deep, and unbreakable, rolling through the Iron Pass like the voice of destiny itself. The battle began with a storm of arrows. The enemy archers on the cliffs unleashed a deadly rain. Ottoman warriors raised shields and pressed forward under the deadly hail. Zarkin and Killil led small teams of climbers up the sheer faces, daggers in teeth, moving like shadows despite the arrows whistling past them. Men fell from the heights, but others took their places, climbing higher, clearing the enemy archers one bloody foothold at a time. In the center, Orhan, Mustafa, and Tamir Boga led the direct push against the barricade. Steel rang against steel in savage close-quarters fighting. Spears thrust through gaps in the stakes. Axes hacked at the wooden barriers. Smoke from burning pitch pots rolled thick through the narrow pass, choking lungs and turning the battlefield into a vision of hell. The cliffs amplified every scream, every clash, every prayer until the entire pass seemed to roar with the fury of 2 dying ages colliding. Burhan Faladios fought beside Orhan, moving slower than before but with deadly purpose. His twin blades still found their mark, one parrying a desperate spear thrust, the other driving home through a gap in an enemy's shield. Each strike cost him visible effort, blood seeping through his bandages, yet he refused to fall back. Then came the moment. From high on the left cliff, Zarkin's voice rang out, "The heights are ours." A great cheer rose from the Ottoman lines as Ottoman archers turned the enemy's own position against them, raining arrows down into the packed mass below. The enemy formation wavered. Their commander screamed orders, but panic had already taken root. Tarhin saw the opening and struck like lightning. His riders thundered through a narrow gap created when the enemy center shifted to face the threat from above. Sabers flashed, horses slammed into the disordered ranks. The rear of the enemy host collapsed instantly. The encirclement closed. The Iron Pass became a slaughter ground. The cliffs echoed with the screams of the dying and the triumphant cries of the faithful. Men threw down weapons and begged for mercy. Others fought to the last, falling beneath the relentless tide of Ottoman steel. In the heart of the chaos, the Last Heir charged straight at Orhan, eyes mad with desperation, sword raised for one final blow. "For Shahanshah," he screamed. Orhan met him without hesitation. Their blades clashed once, twice, then Orhan fainted high, stepped inside the guard and drove his curved saber deep into the man's chest. The Last Heir gasped, eyes widening in final realization before sliding off the steel and crumpling to the blood-soaked ground. With their commander fallen and the pass fully enveloped, the last resistance shattered. The remnants threw down their arms or fled deeper into the mountains in broken, leaderless bands. The iron pass fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the steady rhythm of prayers rising from the victorious. Orhan stood amid the carnage, breathing hard, saber still red in his hand. He looked around at his captains, Mahmud leaning on his spear, Abdul Rahman wiping blood from his face, Mustafa and Tamir Boga standing shoulder to shoulder, Tarhan riding back through the press with his riders, and Barhin Faladios still upright in the saddle, though barely. The long war that had begun in the darkness of the forest continued through the long siege of the citadel, the battles on the ridges and valleys, and now ended here in the Iron Pass. Orhan raised his saber high so that every man could see it. "It is finished," he declared, his voice carrying through the pass like a final judgment. "The tyrant is dead, his last heirs are scattered or slain, the webs of betrayal have been cut. Today rightful authority rises from the ashes of deceit and smoke. Let every soul in these lands know that justice has prevailed." A great cheer erupted, raw, exhausted, yet filled with profound relief and triumph. Men embraced, some wept openly. Prayers of thanks rose louder than any battle cry had been. Yet even in this moment of victory, Orhan did not lower his guard completely. He turned to his inner circle as the sun began its slow descent. "The last hidden traitor has not yet shown himself. We remain vigilant until every man is accounted for and every shadow is examined. But tonight we rest, we tend the wounded, we honor the fallen, and tomorrow we begin the work of true peace, rebuilding what was broken, healing what was torn, and establishing justice that endures beyond the edge of the sword." Barhin Faladios rode closer, his voice weak but clear. "We did it, my lord, from the forest to the Iron Pass, we did it." Orhan placed a hand on his shoulder. "We did it together, old friend, and because of men like you, the flame will continue to burn long after we are gone." As night fell over the Iron Pass, fires were lit. Prayers continued without cease. The wounded were tended. The dead were honored with solemn rites. And for the first time in many long months, the men allowed themselves to believe that the long night of war might finally be giving way to the dawn of a new order. Yet in the deepest shadows of the camp, one man still watched and waited, the final planted traitor whose name had never been spoken aloud. His hand rested on a hidden dagger. His eyes followed Orhan's every movement. The war of steel and open battle had ended. But the final test of loyalty, the last silent betrayal, still waited in the darkness, ready to strike when least expected. The epic that began in the velvet blackness of a moonless forest night now approached its true and final chapter. Honor had triumphed. Justice had claimed its due. But the story of rightful authority, forged through fire, smoke, blood, and unyielding faith, would only be complete when the very last shadow was brought into the light. The night deepened, the fires burned low, and somewhere in the shadows of the Iron Pass, the final act of this long, cinematic tale of destiny still waited to be written. The march of justice was not yet fully at an end. The Iron Pass lay silent under a canopy of stars, the only sounds the crackle of watchfires and the low, rhythmic murmur of prayers rising from exhausted men. Orhan Sahib walked the length of the battlefield alone for a time, stepping carefully between the fallen, his boots leaving dark prints in the blood-soaked earth. The cliff still echoed faintly with the ghosts of the day's thunder, the clash of steel, the roar of flames, the final cries of the broken enemy. Above him, the tattered banners of the last heir lay trampled and torn, their once-proud colors now stained with the final defeat of a false reign. He stopped near the center of the pass where the fighting had been fiercest. There, propped against a fallen boulder, sat Barhin Faladios. The fierce commander's twin blades rested across his lap, his bandages dark with fresh blood, his face pale as moonlight. Yet his eyes remained open, burning with that same unquenchable fire that had carried him from the forest ambush to this final pass. Orhan knelt beside him. "You should be resting, old friend." Faladios managed a weak, blood-flecked smile. "Rest is for the dead, my lord. I am still breathing. That means I still have work to do." He coughed once, wincing. "Did we truly end it?" "We ended the open war," Orhan replied quietly. "The last heirs are scattered or slain. The citadel stands under our banners. The mountains no longer echo with the horns of Shahanshah's allies. But peace is not won by steel alone. The final shadow still moves among us, the last planted traitor whose name we have never spoken aloud. He waits for his moment." Faladios's grip tightened on the hilt of one blade. "Then let him come. Let him show his face tonight before the men sleep. Let justice claim the very last head in the sight of all." Orhan placed a steady hand on Faladios's shoulder. Justice will come, but not in rage. We have walked too long through fire and betrayal to end it with blind fury. Tonight we watch. Tomorrow we begin the true work, rebuilding, healing, establishing authority that does not rest only on the sword. He rose and gave the order. Double watches were set. Every captain moved among his men, eyes sharp, voices low. No man walked alone. Prayers continued without pause, a steady river of faith flowing through the pass. Deep in the shadows near the rear of the camp, where the wounded lay under rough awnings, the final traitor made his move. His name was Harun, a quiet captain who had served under Damir Khan since the early days. He had ridden through the forest, survived the siege, fought on every ridge and in every valley. No one had ever suspected him. He carried no gold, no obvious grudge. Only a single sealed promise from Shahanshah himself, written long before the first ambush, offering him command of the entire eastern province if he could deliver Orhan's head or open the lines at the final battle. Harun slipped through the darkness with a poisoned dagger hidden beneath his cloak. His target was not Orhan directly, too well guarded, but Burhan Faladios. Kill the fierce commander in his weakened state, sow chaos and grief in the heart of the host, then signal the few remaining enemy scouts hidden in the cliffs above. A single fire arrow into the night sky would tell them the moment had come to strike the camp from above while it mourned. He moved like a ghost between the sleeping forms, heart pounding, hands steady on the dagger. One more step. Two. He was almost within reach of Faladios' pallet when a quiet voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Harun! The traitor froze. Orhan Sahib stepped out from behind a supply wagon, saber already drawn, Turhan and Mustafa at his sides. Damir Khan stood behind them, face grim with sorrow. They had been watching. They had suspected. They had waited. Harun's face twisted in sudden panic. My lord, I was only checking on the wounded. No more lies, Orhan said, voice low and heavy with the weight of every betrayal that had come before. We have heard them all, from Yakid in the forest to Selim in the square. You were the last, the final whisper of the old poison. Drop the dagger. For a heartbeat, Harun hesitated, eyes darting toward the cliffs above, hopping for the signal that would never come. Then, with a cry of desperation, he lunged not at Orhan but at Faladios, dagger raised for one final, spiteful strike. He never reached him. Turhan moved like lightning, intercepting the blow with his saber. Steel rang once. The poisoned dagger spun away into the darkness. Mustafa seized Harun's arms and forced him to his knees before Orhan. The entire camp stirred. Men rose, torches flaring to life, forming a silent circle around the scene. Faladios pushed himself upright on his pallet, blades in hand, eyes blazing even through his pain. Harun knelt in the dirt, breathing hard, tears of rage and fear mixing on his face. You don't understand, the war would never end, Shahanshah promised. I only wanted it to stop. Orhan looked down at him without anger, only the deep, weary sorrow of a commander who had seen too many souls trade honor for shadows. We all wanted it to stop, he said quietly, but some chose the path of justice, others chose the path of the serpent. The serpent always devours its host. You have walked that path to its end. Justice was carried out there in the past, before the eyes of the entire host, swift, solemn, and without spectacle. Harun's body was laid beside the other fallen, his name spoken once so that it would never be forgotten as a warning. When it was done, Orhan turned to his captains and the gathered warriors, his voice rising clear and resonant, echoing off the cliffs one final time. The last shadow has fallen, the last head of the serpent has been taken. From the moonless forest where this war began, through the long siege and the arrows that nearly claimed our brother, through every ridge and every valley, through every betrayal and every trial we have endured, the Almighty has guided us, the Almighty has tested us, and now, at last, the open war is ended. He raised his saber toward the sky. Let the fires of the Iron Pass be the final pyre of the old order. Let the dawn that comes tomorrow mark the beginning of rightful authority, not built on fear or gold, but on justice tempered by mercy, on loyalty forged in fire, and on faith that does not break. A great cheer rose, not the raw battle cry of earlier days, but something deeper, something steadier. Men embraced. Some wept openly. Prayers of thanks swelled until they filled the entire pass like a rising tide. Burhan Faladios struggled to his feet, supported by Turhan and Mustafa. For the first time in many weeks, a true smile touched his scarred face. We did it, he whispered. From darkness to dawn, we did it. Orhan placed a hand on his shoulder, then looked out over the host, the weary, the wounded, the faithful who had walked every step of this long road with him. "Tomorrow we turn west," he said. "We return to the citadel. We begin the work of peace. We rebuild what was broken. We heal what was torn. And we ensure that no new serpent ever finds root in these lands again." As the first pale light of true dawn touched the eastern peaks, the host began to stir with new purpose. Wounded men were prepared for the journey. Fires were extinguished. Prayers continued without cease. The long epic that had begun in the velvet blackness of a moonless forest night now reached its final verse. The war of steel and open battle was over. The war of building, of guarding, of preserving justice had only just begun. Orhan Sahib mounted his stallion one last time in the Iron Pass, looking back over the host that had followed him through fire, smoke, blood, and betrayal. "Ride with me, my brothers," he called, voice carrying through the pass like a final blessing. "The Almighty has brought us this far. He will walk with us the rest of the way." The column moved westward at last, banners high, prayers rising, the flame of rightful authority burning steady and bright against the rising sun. The forest was behind them. The siege was behind them. The betrayals were behind them. Ahead lay the citadel, the people, the long and patient work of peace. And somewhere in the distance, the first true dawn of a new era broke over the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, a promise that honor had triumphed, that justice had prevailed, and that the story of these lands would now be written not in blood, but in faith, in mercy, and in the enduring light of rightful authority. The long cinematic tale was complete. Yet the flame continued to burn. And the march, quieter now, steadier now, went on. The column moved westward under a sky painted in soft gold and rose, the first true dawn after the long night of war. No horns sounded. No battle cries echoed off the cliffs. Only the steady rhythm of boots on stone, the creak of saddles, and the low, continuous murmur of prayers accompanied the host as it left the Iron Pass behind. Orhan Sahib rode at the head, his stallion walking with measured steps, as though the animal itself understood that haste was no longer needed. His cloak was torn and stained with the blood and soot of many battles, yet he sat tall, saber resting easy at his side. Behind him stretched the long, weary column, thousands of warriors who had marched through forest ambushes, endured the endless siege, fought across ridges and valleys, and finally broken the last resistance in the narrow throat of the Iron Pass. Orhan Faladios rode near the center, supported by two loyal riders who stayed close in case he faltered. His twin blades were sheathed for the first time in months, strapped across his back like quiet promises kept. His face was still pale, his bandages fresh, but his eyes held a peace that had been absent since the night Yakid's betrayal first stained the forest floor. Tarhan rode at Orhan's right hand as always, his saber cleaned and sheathed, yet his gaze remained vigilant, scanning the ridges above for any final shadow that might dare to move. The wounded were carried on litters or rode double with stronger comrades. The dead, those who could be carried, were brought with honor, wrapped in cloaks, to be buried with proper rites once they reached the citadel. The rest had been given simple graves marked with stones and prayers in the passes they had helped win. As the sun climbed higher, the host descended from the high mountains into gentler foothills. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of wildflowers and distant fields instead of pine and blood. For the first time in many months, men began to speak of home, not of the next battle, but of villages, families, and the lives they had left behind when the first banners of war were raised. Orhan called a halt at midday beside a clear stream that tumbled down from the heights. The men drank deeply, washed the grime of war from their faces, and tended to wounds that had begun to heal. Prayers were offered in gratitude, louder and more joyful than any battle invocation had been. Orhan gathered his captains beneath the shade of an ancient oak. "The open war is finished," he said, voice calm and resonant. "The tyrant is gone, his last shadows have fallen, now begins the harder work, the work that steel alone cannot accomplish. We return to the citadel not as conquerors, but as guardians. We will rebuild the walls, restore the wells, distribute what grain remains, and ensure that justice is seen to be just. No man who truly repents will be turned away. No village will be left to starve. And we will root out any final seeds of betrayal before they can take root again." He looked at each captain in turn, Mahmud, Abdul Rahman, Mustafa, Tamir Boga, Altuddin Sahib, and the others who had stood with him through every trial. "You have all given more than any lord could ask. Some of you will stay in the citadel to help govern. Others will ride to the distant provinces to carry the news and establish order. Tarhan, you will command the garrison until the city is secure. Faladios, when your wounds allow, you will train the new recruits. The younger men must learn that loyalty is not a garment to be worn only in battle, but a chain that binds every day. Palladios nodded slowly, a faint smile touching his lips. I will teach them the weight of these blades and the heavier weight of the oaths that come with them. As the afternoon sun warmed the foothills, the column resumed its march. The pace was gentler now. Men sang low verses from the sacred texts. Some spoke quietly of wives and children they had not seen in years. Others simply walked in silence, letting the weight of the long war begin to lift from their shoulders. By evening they reached the edge of the great plain where the citadel stood in the distance, its towers still scarred, its walls cracked, yet its banners now flew the colors of rightful authority. Smoke no longer rose from burning quarters. Instead, thin columns of cooking smoke drifted upward from the squares where people prepared what meager meals they could. As the host approached the outer gates, the people came out to meet them, not in fear but with cautious hope. Women held children on their hips. Old men leaned on staffs. Young boys stared wide-eyed at the warriors who had ended the long nightmare. Orhan rode through the gates at the head of the column and dismounted in the central square, the same square where Shahanshah had met his end. He stood before the gathered crowd and spoke with a voice that carried to every ear. People of this city and these lands, the long night is over. The tyrant and his poison are gone. We have paid for this day with blood and with prayer. Now we offer you peace under justice. No more starvation behind closed gates. No more fear of the next betrayal. No more heads upon spears except as warnings to those who would choose the path of the serpent. We will rebuild together, we will heal together, and we will ensure that the flame of rightful authority burns steady and true for generations yet to come. A murmur rose, then swelled into cheers, hesitant at first, then stronger, until the entire square echoed with the sound of a people daring to hope again. That night, fires burned brightly in the squares. Bread and what meat could be spared were shared. Surgeons worked without rest. Prayers of thanksgiving rose until the stars themselves seemed to listen. In a quiet chamber within the inner keep, Orhan sat with his closest companions, Turhan, Palladios now resting on a proper bed, Mahmud and Abdul Rahman. The room was simple, lit by a single lamp. The last traitor is gone, Orhan said softly. The last battle is won, yet the real test begins now. Can we build something that endures beyond the edge of the sword? Can loyalty survive when there is no enemy at the gates? Palladios shifted, wincing, but his voice was firm. It will endure if we teach it every day, not with grand speeches but with honest rule, with mercy where it is deserved, with justice where it is required, and with the memory of how far we walked through fire to reach this night. Turhan nodded. I will keep the garrison strong. No shadow will slip through while I watch. One by one, the captains spoke their vows, quiet, solemn promises to guard the peace they had purchased with so much blood. Later, when the others had gone, Orhan stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. The citadel spread below him, still scarred but beginning to breathe again. In the distance, the forest where the war had begun lay dark and silent under the moon. He rested his hands on the stone railing and whispered into the night. O Lord of the worlds, you brought us from darkness to this dawn. You tested us with fire and betrayal, with arrows and smoke, with the weight of command and the sting of loss. We are only men, flawed, weary, yet striving. Guide our hands now as we build what must endure. Let justice be our foundation. Let mercy be our roof. Let faith be the light that never goes out. A soft wind stirred, carrying the faint scent of pine from the distant forest and the cleaner air of a city beginning to heal. Behind him, in the chamber, Orhan Palladios had fallen into a deep, healing sleep, his twin blades resting beside the bed like faithful guardians. The long cinematic tale that had opened in the velvet blackness of a moonless night, with Orhan standing upon a fog-shrouded ridge, hand on his blade, whispering oaths to the wind, had reached its final, quiet chapter. The war was over. The peace had begun. And somewhere in the years ahead, children would be told the story of the commander who walked through fire and betrayal, of the fierce swordsman who refused to fall, of the right hand who never left his lord's side, and of the host that turned darkness into dawn. The flame of rightful authority burned steady now, not with the roar of battle, but with the quiet, enduring light of justice, mercy, and faith. The march had ended. The building had begun. And the story, though its greatest battles were done, would live on, told around fires, passed from father to son, a reminder that even the longest night eventually yields to the dawn when men walk the path of honor with unyielding hearts. The night was deep and peaceful. The citadel slept. And for the first time in many long months, Orhan Sahib allowed himself a moment of quiet rest, knowing that the Almighty who had guided them through every trial would continue to watch over the fragile peace they had won with blood, with prayer, and with unbreakable loyalty. The end and the beginning. The first true dawn of peace broke gently over the citadel, painting its scarred towers in soft hues of rose and gold. No battle horns shattered the silence. No war cries echoed from the walls. Only the call to morning prayer rose from the central square, clear, steady, and filled with a gratitude deeper than any victory cheer had ever been. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest balcony of the inner keep, hands resting on the cool stone, looking out over the city he had fought so long to free. The streets below were already stirring. Women carried water from newly cleared wells. Children played cautiously among the rubble, their laughter tentative but growing stronger with each passing hour. Merchants opened stalls with what little goods remained, and Ottoman captains moved among the people, distributing grain and ensuring no one went hungry. The long war that had begun in the velvet blackness of a moonless forest night had finally ended. Yet Orhan felt no great surge of triumph, only a quiet, profound weariness mixed with hope. He had walked through fire and betrayal, through arrows and smoke, through the deaths of good men and the judgment of tyrants. Now the real test lay before him, not winning peace with the sword, but preserving it with wisdom. A soft footstep sounded behind him. Orhan approached, his face still marked by the soot and scars of battle, but his eyes calm for the first time in many months. "The city breathes again, my lord," Orhan said quietly. "The people are beginning to believe. They speak your name not with fear, but with something closer to trust." Orhan nodded slowly. "Trust is more fragile than any wall we rebuilt. We must earn it every day, double the watches for now, but gently. Let the men rest where they can, the wounded must heal, the dead must be honored, and we must begin the work that steel cannot do." He turned and descended the stairs with Orhan at his side. In the central square, Burhan Faladios waited, leaning heavily on a staff but standing on his own feet. His twin blades were sheathed at his side, no longer needed for war but kept close like old companions. The fierce commander's face was still drawn with pain, yet a quiet strength had returned to his posture. "You should be resting," Orhan said, a faint smile touching his lips. Faladios gave a low chuckle that ended in a wince. "Rest is for men who have finished their work. Mine is not yet done. I have already begun training the young ones this morning, those who never saw a real battle. They need to learn that a blade is only as strong as the oath behind it." The three men walked together through the square as the city came to life around them. Captains reported in turn. Mahmud had secured the outer gates and begun organizing repairs to the main walls. Abdul Rahman was overseeing the distribution of the last captured supplies. Mustafa and Tamir Boga were tending to the wounded, both Ottoman and former enemy soldiers who had surrendered honorably. Altuddin Sahib had started clearing the rubble from the main marketplace so trade could slowly resume. By midday, Orhan called the captains together in the great hall of the inner keep, a chamber still bearing the scars of fire and smoke, but now lit by clean sunlight streaming through repaired windows. "We stand at the beginning of a new chapter," he told them, his voice deep and measured, carrying the rhythmic weight of one who had spoken history into being. "The war of steel is over. The war of building has begun. We will not rule by fear as Shahanshah did. We will rule by justice tempered with mercy. Every man who truly repents will find a place. Every village that suffered under the old regime will receive aid. We will repair the wells, rebuild the roads, and ensure that loyalty is rewarded and betrayal is never forgotten, but never used as an excuse for cruelty." He looked at each man in turn. "Orhan, you will command the garrison here until the city is fully secure. Faladios, when your strength returns, you will train the new generation of warriors, teaching them that honor is heavier than any blade. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman ride to the surrounding provinces and carry the news. Offer protection to those who accept rightful authority. Mustafa and Tamir Boga remain here and help restore order among the people. The rest will assist where they are needed most." The captains bowed their heads in acceptance, their vows renewed not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet determination of peace. As the days turned into weeks, the citadel slowly transformed. Walls were mended, markets reopened. Prayers filled the air 5 times each day, binding the people together in something stronger than fear. Former enemies who had laid down their arms were given the chance to prove their repentance through honest labor. Some were welcomed into the ranks, others returned to their villages with seeds and tools instead of chains. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, Orhan walked the repaired battlements with Burhan Faladios. The fierce commander moved more steadily now, though he still carried a slight limp and favored his right side. His twin blades hung at his hips, no longer needed for war, but kept as symbols of the long road they had walked together. "Do you remember the night it began?" Faladios asked quietly, gazing toward the distant forest that lay dark on the horizon. You stood on that ridge, hand on your blade, whispering oaths to the wind. I thought then that we might all die in those trees. Orhan smiled faintly. I thought the same, yet here we stand. The forest is quiet now, the citadel stands, and the people below no longer look at us with terror in their eyes. Faladios nodded. We paid for this peace with blood, yours, mine, and that of too many good men. Yakid, Kuladz, Jarkata, Selim, Harun, even Shahanshah himself. Their names should be remembered not as heroes but as warnings. Let every child born in these lands learn that betrayal devours its own. And that loyalty once forged in fire can endure, Orhan added. That is the true legacy we leave. They stood in companionable silence as the stars began to appear one by one. Below them, the city lights flickered to life, small lamps and cooking fires replacing the flames of war. Children's laughter drifted up from the streets. Somewhere, a woman sang a gentle lullaby. Tarhan joined them on the battlements, his face relaxed for the first time in memory. The scouts report no movement from the east, he said. The last remnants have scattered into the wilderness or returned to their villages to swear new oaths. The land is quiet. Orhan placed a hand on Tarhan's shoulder, then on Faladios's. Then our work here is done for now. Tomorrow we ride out not to war but to the provinces. We will meet the people, listen to their grievances, and begin weaving the fabric of a lasting peace. The flame we kindled in the forest must now become a steady light that guides future generations. As the three men looked out over the city they had saved, a soft wind rose from the west, carrying the clean scent of new growth and distant rain. The long cinematic tale that had opened in darkness, with Orhan standing upon a fog-shrouded ridge, hand upon his blade, whispering sacred oaths into the night, had reached its quiet, hopeful conclusion. The war was over. The peace had taken root. And somewhere in the years to come, storytellers would gather around fires to recount the epic of Orhan Sahib and his brothers. The commander who walked through betrayal and fire, the fierce swordsman who refused to fall, the loyal right hand who never wavered, and the host of faithful men who turned a moonless night of ambush into a dawn of justice and rightful authority. The forest slept peacefully now. The citadel stood strong. And the flame of honor, tempered by mercy and guarded by faith, burned steady and true, a light that would guide these lands for generations yet unborn. The march had ended. The building had begun. And the story, though its greatest battles were done, would live on forever in the hearts of those who remembered what it cost to walk the long path from darkness to light. The night was calm. The citadel slept in peace. And for the first time in many long months, the men who had borne the weight of war allowed themselves to dream not of the next battle, but of the better world they had helped create. The end. The years turned gently after the Iron Pass, like pages in a book written not by the sword but by patient hands. Orhan Sahib ruled from the citadel not as a conqueror but as a guardian. The scarred towers were repaired stone by stone. The cracked walls were strengthened. Wells ran clean again, markets filled with the voices of merchants and the laughter of children who had never known the terror of Shahanshah's rule. Every morning the call to prayer rose clear and strong, binding the people together in something deeper than fear. Orhan Faladios never fully recovered the speed of his twin blades, but he became something greater, a teacher. In the training grounds beneath the inner keep, he stood before young warriors, boys who had grown up during the Long War, and taught them that a blade is only as sharp as the oath behind it. His voice, though quieter now, still carried the fire of the man who had dueled champions amid smoke and flame. Remember the forest, he would say, pointing with one scarred hand. Remember the arrows in my back. Loyalty is not loud, it is the quiet choice you make when no one is watching. Tarhan remained Orhan's right hand, commanding the garrison with the same quiet vigilance he had shown on every battlefield. He rode the provinces often, listening to village elders, settling disputes, and ensuring that no new seeds of betrayal could take root. Where he passed, men spoke of the shadow of justice, the man who never slept while his lord's peace was threatened. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman became governors of the eastern and western provinces, riding with small escorts to carry the law of mercy and strength. Mustafa and Tamir Boga trained new companies of guards, teaching them the lessons of the long siege, that patience can be deadlier than any charge, and that a shield raised for your brother is stronger than any wall of stone. The people changed too. Those who had once cowered behind locked gates now walked the streets freely. Farmers returned to fields that had lain fallow. Women sang while weaving cloth. Children played games that no longer ended in mock battles. In the evenings, around fires in the squares, old men told the epic of Orhan Sahib, how he had stood on a fog-shrouded ridge and sworn oaths to the wind, how Faladios had taken arrows meant for others and still ridden into battle, how Tarhan had never left his lord's side, and how a host of faithful men had turned a moonless night of ambush into a dawn of justice. One spring evening, many years later, Orhan stood once more upon the highest balcony of the inner keep. The citadel spread below him, glowing with the warm lights of homes and lanterns. The forest in the distance was green and peaceful, no longer a place of ambush but a place of timber and shade. The plain where so many battles had been fought now waved with golden wheat. Burhan Faladios joined him, moving slowly with the aid of a carved staff, his twin blades long since retired to a place of honor in the great hall. His beard was fully gray now, but his eyes still held that fierce spark. "Do you ever miss it?" Faladios asked quietly. Orhan smiled faintly. "The war, no, the brotherhood every day. I miss the nights when we gathered around fires knowing that tomorrow might be our last. I miss the clarity that comes when everything is reduced to steel and faith. But I do not miss the blood, I do not miss the betrayals." Faladios nodded. "We paid a heavy price. Yakid, Kulad's Jarkata, Selim Harun, Shahansha himself, so many good men whose names we still speak so their sacrifice is not forgotten. And yet, look below us. Children who have never known hunger behind locked gates. Villages that no longer fear the tax collector's whip. A land that breathes freely." They stood in silence for a long moment, listening to the distant sounds of the city, a mother singing a lullaby, laughter drifting from a square, the soft call of a night watchman. Then Faladios spoke again, his voice low and reflective. "We began in darkness, my lord, a moonless night, a fog-shrouded ridge, you standing there with your hand on your blade, whispering oaths to the wind. I thought then that we would all die in those trees. Instead, we built something that may outlive us both." Orhan turned to him, placing a hand on his old friend's shoulder. "We did not build it alone. Every man who marched with us, every prayer offered in the smoke, every wound borne without complaint, they all helped write this chapter. And now it falls to those who come after us to keep the flame burning." Below them, in the central square, a group of young warriors trained under the torchlight. Their instructor, one of Faladios' best students, called out the same lessons the fierce commander had once taught. A blade is only as strong as the oath behind it. Loyalty is not loud, it is the quiet choice you make when no one is watching. Orhan watched them for a long moment, then spoke softly, almost to himself. "The forest is quiet now, the citadel stands strong, the people sleep without fear. If this is the legacy we leave, a land where justice is not only spoken but lived, then every drop of blood, every night of smoke and fire, every betrayal we endured was worth it." Faladios nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "From the velvet blackness of that first night to this quiet evening, we walked a long road, my lord." "We did," Orhan replied, "and by the grace of the Almighty we walked it together." As the stars wheeled overhead and the city settled into peaceful sleep, the two old warriors remained on the balcony a while longer, silent guardians of a peace they had purchased with their youth, their blood, and their unyielding faith. The long epic that had opened in darkness had reached its quiet, enduring close. The war was a memory. The peace was a living thing. And somewhere in the years yet to come, when children asked their grandfathers about the man who had stood on a fog-shrouded ridge and sworn oaths to the wind, they would be told the full story. Of Orhan Sahib, the commander who turned betrayal into justice. Of Burhan Faladios, the fierce swordsman who refused to fall. Of Tarhan, the loyal right hand who never wavered. And of the host of faithful men who walked through fire and shadow so that future generations could live in light. The flame they kindled in the forest still burned, steady, quiet, and true. Not with the roar of battle, but with the enduring warmth of honor, mercy, and rightful authority. And so the story ended not with thunder, but with the gentle sound of a city breathing freely beneath a peaceful sky. The march was complete. The building endured. And the light continued. Forever. The years flowed on like a quiet river after the Iron Pass, carrying the citadel and its people into a new season of healing. Orhan Sahib grew older in the quiet dignity of stewardship. His hair and beard turned the color of winter frost, yet his back remained straight and his eyes clear. He no longer rode to war, but he still walked the battlements at dawn and dusk, looking out over the lands he had helped save. The scars of siege had faded beneath fresh stone and whitewash. Gardens bloomed where rubble once lay. Children played in the squares where heads had once been displayed on spears. One golden autumn evening, many years after the final battle, Orhan sat beneath the ancient oak in the central courtyard, the same tree that had shaded the captains on the day they returned from the Iron Pass. Orhan Faladios sat across from him, older now, his twin blades long retired to a place of honor in the great hall. He leaned on a carved staff, but his voice still carried the quiet strength of the man who had once charged through smoke and arrows with death in his eyes. They spoke little at first, content simply to share the silence of old comrades who had walked through hell together and emerged on the other side. Finally, Faladios broke the stillness. "Do you remember the night it truly began?" he asked, gazing toward the distant forest that now stood peaceful and green on the horizon. "You on that ridge, hand on your blade, whispering oaths into the wind. I thought we would all die there among the pines." Orhan smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I thought the same. I saw only darkness ahead, betrayal, fire, endless nights of smoke and steel. I never imagined we would sit here one day beneath this tree, listening to children laugh instead of men die." Faladios nodded slowly. "We lost so many, Yakid in the forest, Kuleds before the walls, Jarkada on the tower stairs, Selim and Harun in their final treachery, so many good men whose names we still speak so their sacrifice is not forgot. And Shahanshah himself, his head upon the tower, was the end of one age and the beginning of another." He paused, then added with a quiet chuckle, "And I took enough arrows in my back to make a porcupine jealous. Yet here I am, still breathing, still teaching young fools that a blade without honor is just sharp metal." Orhan looked at his old friend with deep affection. "You taught them well. I hear the young warriors speak of you with awe, the man who rode with arrows in his back and still struck down the enemy champion. Your legend grows stronger than any of us." Faladios waved a hand dismissively, though a small, proud smile touched his lips. "Legends are for storytellers. The truth is simpler. We endured. We chose loyalty when it was hardest. We refused to let the serpent win." Tarhan joined them then, moving with the same quiet vigilance that had never left him. His hair was gray at the temples, but his step was still sure. He carried no saber now, only a simple staff of office, yet every man in the citadel still called him the Shadow of Justice. "The provinces are quiet," Tarhan reported, sitting beside them. "The eastern lords have fully accepted the new order. The western villages send tribute willingly. No whispers of betrayal have reached my ears in 3 years. The people, they speak of you both as fathers of the peace." Orhan looked out over the courtyard where families gathered, where young boys practiced with wooden swords under the watchful eyes of Faladios' students, where old men told tales around small fires. "This is what we fought for," he said softly. "Not glory, not thrones, not even revenge. We fought so that children could grow up without knowing the taste of fear behind locked gates, so that farmers could tend their fields without wondering if soldiers would burn them, so that loyalty would mean something more than survival." He turned to his 2 oldest companions, his voice warm with memory. "From that moonless night in the forest, through the long siege and the arrows, through every ridge and valley and the final stand in the Iron Pass, we walked a long road together. We bled, we buried brothers, we watched traitors fall, and somehow, by the grace of the Almighty, we reached this evening." Faladios leaned forward, his eyes distant but bright. "I still dream of it sometimes, the smoke, the clash of steel, the moment I took those arrows and thought, this is how it ends. But it wasn't the end, it was only the middle. The real victory came later, in the quiet years when we chose to build instead of conquer." Tarhan nodded, "And in the way the young ones now train, they speak of honor as something living, not just words in old stories. They know the cost because we made sure they remembered." The 3 men sat together as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Children ran past, laughing. A woman sang a lullaby from a nearby window. The call to evening prayer began to rise from the minaret, pure and peaceful. Orhan spoke one last time, his voice low but carrying the weight of a lifetime. "We began in darkness, a fog-shrouded ridge, a whispered oath to the wind. We ended in light, not the blaze of battle, but the steady glow of a city that breathes freely. If this is the legacy we leave, a land where justice is not only spoken but lived, where loyalty endures beyond the edge of the sword, then every wound, every loss, every night of smoke and fire was worth it." He raised his hand toward the sky, as if offering the moment itself to the Almighty. "May the flame we kindled in the forest continue to burn long after we are gone, not with the roar of war, but with the quiet warmth of mercy, faith, and rightful authority." Faladios and Tarhan bowed their heads in silent agreement. As the stars began to appear one by one overhead, the three old warriors sat beneath the ancient oak, silent guardians of a peace they had purchased with their youth, their blood, and their unyielding hearts. The long cinematic tale that had opened in the velvet blackness of a moonless night had reached its truest, gentlest close. The war was a memory etched in stone and story. The peace was a living garden, tended by hands that once held only swords. And somewhere in the years yet to come, when grandchildren asked their elders about the man who stood on a fog-shrouded ridge and swore oaths to the wind, they would hear the full epic. Of Orhan Saheb, the commander who turned betrayal into justice. Of Burhan Faladios, the fierce swordsman who refused to fall. Of Tarhan, the loyal right hand who never wavered. And of the host of faithful men who walked through fire and shadow so that future generations could live beneath a peaceful sky. The forest slept quietly now. The citadel stood strong and whole. The flame of honor, tempered by mercy and guarded by faith, burned steady and true, a light that would guide these lands for generations yet unborn. The night was calm and kind. The city slept in peace. And the story, though its greatest battles were long finished, would live on forever in the hearts of those who remembered what it cost to walk the long path from darkness to light. The end and the quiet, enduring beginning. The decades passed like quiet seasons over the citadel, each one gentler than the last. Orhan Saheb had become an old man, his once powerful frame now softened by time, his beard and hair white as mountain snow. Yet his eyes remained sharp and kind, carrying the quiet wisdom earned through years of fire, betrayal, and hard-won peace. He no longer walked the battlements at dawn with a saber at his side. Instead, he moved slowly through the gardens he had helped plant, leaning lightly on a simple staff carved from the wood of the ancient oak that had once shaded the captains on their day of return. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted down like memories, Orhan sat beneath that same oak in the central courtyard. Orhan Faladios was beside him, equally aged, his twin blades long since hung in the great hall as relics of a bygone age. The fierce commander now walked with a pronounced limp and spoke with the measured cadence of a man who had learned that patience could be sharper than any blade. Tarhan sat with them as well, still straight-backed and watchful, though his hair had silvered and his once lethal hands now rested peacefully on his knees. They spoke little at first, content to watch the city live around them. Children chased one another through the square, their laughter bright and unafraid. Young men trained with wooden swords under the gentle guidance of Faladios's former students, learning not only how to fight but why they must never need to. Women carried baskets of fresh bread from the markets. Elders sat in the shade telling stories to wide-eyed grandchildren. "Do you remember the night it truly began?" Faladios asked at last, his voice soft with memory. "You standing on that fog-shrouded ridge, hand upon your blade, whispering oaths to the wind. I thought then that we would all perish among the pines before the moon rose again." Orhan smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with quiet fondness. "I thought the same. I saw only endless darkness ahead, betrayal in the trees, fire before the walls, arrows in the smoke. I never imagined we would sit here one day beneath this tree, listening to children laugh instead of men die." Faladios nodded slowly. "We paid dearly for this peace. Yakid in the forest, Kuluds before the walls, Jarkata on the tower stairs, Selim and Harun in their final treachery. So many good brothers whose names we still speak, so their sacrifice is not forgot. And Shahanshah himself, his head upon the tower, marked the end of one age and the beginning of another." He paused, then added with a faint, wry smile, "And I took enough arrows in my back that day to make a porcupine jealous. Yet here I am, still breathing, still reminding the young ones that a blade without honor is merely sharp metal." Tarhan chuckled softly. "And I never left your side, my lord, not in the forest, not in the siege, not in the iron pass. Some things do not change, even when the world does." Orhan looked at his two oldest friends with deep affection. "We did not walk that road alone. Every man who marched with us, every prayer offered in the smoke, every wound borne without complaint, they all helped write this chapter. And now it falls to those who come after us to keep the flame burning." He gestured toward the training ground where young warriors practiced. "Look at them. They learn the weight of oaths before they learn the weight of steel. They know the cost because we made sure they remembered. That is our true victory." As the sun began its slow descent, painting the citadel in hues of amber and rose, a group of children approached shyly. One brave boy, no more than 8 years old, stepped forward and asked, "Grandfather Orhan, will you tell us the story again? The one about the moonless night and the forest and the arrows and the man who would not fall." Orhan smiled and beckoned them closer. Faladios and Tarhan leaned in as well, their old eyes bright with memory. And so, beneath the ancient oak, as the golden light faded into twilight, Orhan began to speak, his voice steady and rhythmic, carrying the weight of lived history. It began on a moonless night long ago when the forest whispered secrets older than empires. I stood upon a fog-shrouded ridge, hand upon my blade, swearing oaths to the wind and to the Almighty. Beside me was Tarhan, my right hand, ever watchful, and there was Burhan Faladios, fierce as winter steel, who would later take arrows meant for others and still ride into battle with death in his eyes. The children listened, wide-eyed and spellbound, as the old commander wove the epic once more: the forest ambush, the long siege of fire and smoke, the betrayals of Yakid and the others, the arrows in Faladios's back, the fall of Shahanshah, the battles on the ridges and in the Iron Pass, and finally the quiet years of building a peace that endured. When the story ended, one little girl asked softly, "And what happened after the last battle, grandfather?" Orhan looked at his two old companions, then at the peaceful city around them, and answered with gentle certainty. "After the last battle came the hardest part, the part that steel could not win. We rebuilt what was broken, we healed what was torn, we taught the young that loyalty is not loud but quiet and steadfast, and we ensured that the flame we kindled in the darkness of that forest night would burn steady and true for all who came after us, not with the roar of war, but with the quiet warmth of mercy, faith, and rightful authority." The children sat in awed silence for a moment, then scattered with thanks and bright laughter, running back to their games. As the stars began to appear one by one overhead, the three old warriors remained beneath the oak a while longer. Faladios spoke first, his voice soft. "We began in darkness, we ended in light." Tarhan nodded, "And the light still burns." Orhan looked up at the sky, then at the city that had become their legacy, and whispered the final words of their long journey. "By the grace of the Almighty, we walked the long road together, through fire, through smoke, through steel and unyielding faith, and now, at last, the story rests in peace." The night was calm and kind. The citadel slept beneath a blanket of stars. The flame they had kindled so many years ago continued to burn, steady, quiet, and true, a light that would guide these lands for generations yet unborn. The epic was complete. The peace endured. And the memory of the men who had turned a moonless night of ambush into a dawn of justice lived on forever in the hearts of those who remembered what it cost to walk the long path from darkness to light. The end. Burden of command. Prepare the assault for tomorrow night under cover of darkness and smoke. We strike the southern sector where the cracks run deepest. Jarkata Saheb and Altadin Saheb ready the siege towers and ladders. Zarkin and Killil, position your archers to sweep the battlements and cover the advance. Mahmud, you will anchor the center with the heaviest infantry. Abdul Rahman, swing the right flank to pin any sally that dares emerge. Tamir Boga and Mustafa lead the forlorn hope that will plant the first ladders. Damir Khan, hold the reserves and watch for any new betrayal from within or without. The camp stirred into purposeful frenzy as the day wore on. Engineers worked without rest, reinforcing wheels on the great siege towers and loading catapults with incendiary shot wrapped in oil-soaked rags. Prayers rose in steady waves, men kneeling on prayer mats turned toward the holy direction, invoking protection, victory, and the exposure of every hidden traitor. The psychological pressure on the city intensified. Heralds rode close under flags of truce, shouting offers of amnesty for any soldier or civilian who cast open a gate or lowered a rope from the walls. Defectors continued to slip out in small, ragged groups, their tailies painting a picture of utter collapse within grain stores exhausted, water rationed to sips, Shahanshah growing ever more tyrannical, executing suspected plotters in the public squares while his remaining loyalists clung to power through fear alone. As night fell and the fires burned low, the trap of false intelligence from earlier days continued to yield fruit. A final conspirator was uncovered among the support staff, a lesser officer who had attempted to signal the city with a lantern code during the previous watch. He was brought before Orhan in chains, his confession spilling out in broken sobs under the steady gaze of Burhan Faladios. "Shahanshah promised me command of a province, forgiveness for past debts. I was weak in the face of endless war." Orhan listened without anger, only the deep sorrow of a leader who had seen too many souls trade honor for shadows. "Weakness invited the serpent," he replied quietly, "and the serpent always devours its host. Your fate will serve as the final warning." Justice was swift and public at first light the next morning, reinforcing the unbreakable chain of loyalty that bound the host together. The night of the assault arrived wrapped in thick clouds that swallowed the moon and stars, granting perfect cover for the approaching storm. The Ottoman host moved in near silence, thousands of men advancing across the plain like a tide of shadow and steel. Smoke pots were lit upwind, sending thick acrid clouds rolling toward the southern walls to blind the defenders and mask the advance. Siege towers creaked forward on greased axles, pushed by teams of sweating warriors under Jarkata Sahib's commands. Ladders were carried low, ready to be raised at the last moment. Then the signal came, a single flaming arrow arcing high into the sky. The catapults sang their deadly song, hurling massive stones and burning projectiles that crashed against the already's voice carrying over the din. Drive them into the streets, let the people see that the tyrant cannot protect them. The outer defenses began to crumble under the relentless pressure. Sections of the wall were cleared, banners of the righteous planted atop the battlements, their fabric snapping in the wind generated by the flames below. Yet Shahanshah was not finished. From the inner citadel came a desperate counter, his remaining palace guard and loyal captains launching a fierce sally through a side gate, attempting to retake the breached section and trap the attackers against the wall. The fighting grew even more savage in the narrow streets just inside the city, house-to-house chaos where every alley became a killing ground, every rooftop a platform for archers. Fire spread from building to building as pitch pots were hurled, turning entire blocks into roaring infernos. Smoke billowed thicker than ever, choking lungs and obscuring vision, while the cries of civilians trapped between armies added a heartbreaking layer to the night's horror. In the heart of this inferno, another personal duel unfolded. A towering figure emerged from the enemy ranks, Shahanshah's most feared champion, a giant of a man clad in blackened mail, wielding a massive mace that had crushed many skulls in service to the tyrant. He challenged any who weakened masonry with thunderous booms that shook the ground. Archers under Zarkin and Killil unleashed volleys that darkened the air, forcing defenders to cower behind the battlements. Forward, Orhan commanded, his voice rising like a clarion above the chaos. For justice, for rightful authority, in the name of the Almighty. Tamir Boga and Mustafa led the forlorn hope, sprinting through the smoke with ladders held high. Arrows whistled past them, some men fell but others pressed on with grim determination. The first ladders slammed against the cracked wall and the climbers began their deadly ascent, shields raised against the rain of stones, boiling oil, and desperate spear thrusts from above. Close quarters fighting erupted atop the battlements almost immediately, swords hacking in the choking smoke, daggers finding gaps in armor, bodies tumbling from the height to crash onto the rubble below. Tamir Boga took a spear to the shoulder but roared defiance and drove his own blade through his attacker, clearing space for more men to gain the wall. Orhan Faladios was among the first to reach the parapet, his twin blades weaving death in a whirlwind of steel. He dueled a captain of Shahanshah's elite guard in the narrow walkway, the two men locked in a savage personal clash amid the flames and screams. "Your master's lies end here," Faladios snarled, parrying a wild swing and countering with a thrust that pierced the man's throat. Blood sprayed across the stones as the defender fell, and Faladios pressed forward, carving a bloody path for the main host. Orhan himself ascended a siege tower, emerging onto the wall with saber drawn, Tarhin at his side like an unbreakable shield. Together they fought through the press, steel ringing, smoke stinging their eyes. The night turned into a hellish vision of fire and shadow. "Push them back," Orhan shouted. The dawn broke pale and unforgiving, a thin veil of mist clinging to the plain like the last breath of a dying giant. Orhan Sahib remained motionless upon the ridge, his silhouette etched against the slowly brightening sky, eyes fixed on the city whose walls now bore the deep scars of weeks of unrelenting pressure. Cracks ran like lightning frozen in stone across the southern sector, and sections of the parapet had collapsed into rubble piles that invited the daring or the desperate. Smoke from the city's internal fires rose in thin, sickly columns, carrying with them the faint, bitter scent of desperation, burned refuse, fouled water, and the unmistakable undertone of human suffering. "The hour draws near," Orhan murmured, his voice a low invocation carried on the morning breeze. "By the grace of the compassionate, the tyrant's house of lies shall crumble not by our hands alone, but by the weight of his own sins." Tarhin's column returned before the sun had fully cleared the eastern hills, their horses lathered and their faces grim with the dust of hard riding. They had probed the eastern approaches and clashed with the vanguard of a new opportunistic force, perhaps 1,500 strong, drawn by rumors of a rich prize if Shahanshah's city fell or if they could force a negotiated settlement that left them wealthy. The skirmish had been sharp and decisive in the forested foothills, arrows whistling through the trees, close-quarters charges where steel met steel in the dappled shadows, and Tarhin himself leading a daring envelopment that sent the enemy scattering with heavy losses. "They are not true believers in Shahanshah's cause," Tarhin reported, dismounting heavily. "Merely jackals circling the carcass. We bloodied them enough to slow their march, but they will regroup. Another week, perhaps less, and they may attempt to link with whatever remains of the city's strength." Orhan Faladios listened in silence, his twin blades resting across his knees as he sat sharpening them with slow, rhythmic strokes that sounded like the ticking of fate itself. "Then we cannot wait for hunger alone," he said, voice dark and resonant. "The southern wall weakens daily. One well-placed assault, supported by fire and smoke, could breach the outer defenses and force Shahanshah's hand. Let the people inside see our banners within their streets, and their will to resist will shatter like glass." Orhan weighed the words carefully, then nodded once, the motion heavy with the